So I guess officially the first question, but something that reminds me of, did you go? So did you go to FutureCon?
I did not. No.
Okay. So there was a gentleman there that he works at Circle K.
Okay.
I think his name was Jason. Jason with an H, last name.
Mm-hmm.
And he, during lunch, he had a presentation where he said he was an accidental CISO. Right. And he talks about a story where his family was the target of not necessarily like a hate crime, but digital, what's the best way to describe it? Essentially extortion.
Yeah. That's,
Digital extortion.
Makes
right?
sense.
And he wasn't in security at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but it kind of got him thinking about this world of security and cyber and things like that. And he tells a story about how it started where his family was threatened and, they were worried for the safety of the family and the kids and his
Mm-hmm.
wife. But that's kind of what started him down the path of security.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that story is necessarily unique. I mean, I think it's unique in the sense that what happened to him kind of pushed him over the edge and got him into cyber.
Mm-hmm.
But in the conversations that I've had with different guests, what I've come to realize is that when people are children, or when these CISOs and people in security and executives in security, when they were kids, they didn't say, "When I grow up, I want to be a CISO."
Never heard that dream. No.
No, right?
No.
And what I found is that it's mostly because it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
For most of the people, it didn't exist when they were children. So
Right.
it was doctor, lawyer, nurse, things that people kind of respect.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, parents kind of push their kids to do because of the financial incentive,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's like, if you're a lawyer, we know you don't have to worry about money,
Mm-hmm.
usually. And so what I find interesting is that most of the people had not to say that had no desire, but when they were kids, it wasn't to grow up and become a security professional.
Right.
And with your background, I don't think I'm stating anything wrong. I don't think that that's any different, right?
No, absolutely correct. I mean, there was no thought of the security discipline in my head, growing up and, going through school and even getting into college. I was studying to be an actor. I really was. Like, I wanted to be an actor. I thought that was really cool, and it took one semester in college to figure out I was never going to make it. I did not have what it took. And then it's like, then you're figuring out, okay, where do you go from here? And around that time, IT was beginning to blow up, a little bit. And I was encouraged to go that route by my parents. They were very practical people, and to earn a living, there's a lot of value to that. And I had an older brother who had a business degree as well, not in technology or anything like that, but had gone through that route. So I think by the end of college, when I actually had to declare and get all the credits in and everything like that, I made my way through the business school and focused in on a tech degree, which I ended up getting. But even then, it really wasn't where I wanted to go. So I ended up going for broke and figuring out, okay, the whole actor thing didn't work, but I love radio. I had been in high school working part-time and doing the terrible graveyard shifts of radio broadcasting at a really small station in a small town that was near where I lived. And I had kind of grown up through that and done that for many years. And as I was graduating, I'm like, there was a radio, like a job fair type of thing for all the stations in the local market. And I attended it, and I'm like, you know what, if I don't try this now, I'm never going to do it. And this is probably my best shot at it. So went there, ended up getting a job, and started to work in radio. And I did that for a couple of years. And that was some of the most fun times I've ever had in my life. It was amazing to go through that experience. And there was so many great opportunities. I met some really, really cool people. And then in that time, as we started moving forward, that's when technology became more predominant in radio. It was just starting, that wave was starting to go up. So instead of vinyl and CDs, and you're playing, they were called carts. They looked like 8-track tapes, really, that they played the commercials on and everything like that. And there was already a technology presence when it came to recording, commercial production, everything like that. Macs were huge. They were brilliant at doing that work. And we had a bunch of them in there. And so tech was already involved, but not when it got to the on air. But it just so happened that things were starting to move that direction, and they were putting all the music and all the commercials and all the sounders and everything like that were going digital. And so I was there, and I became their first IT person that they had at the group. So I would do on-air stuff as part-time, and then my full-time job was to be their tech consultant. Okay. And so I helped put in the systems to play the stuff on air, and I helped maintain the recording systems and everything like that. And it was really, really a lot of fun to be on the forefront of that in radio. Sadly, I couldn't pay my bills. It was not a lucrative type of thing.
Well, okay. What kind of salary were you making at the time?
I was making, I think it equated out to be like $18,000 a year.
Okay, so like $9 an hour?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, at that point in time. And I had asked for, I think when I got to my 2-year mark, I had asked for a raise to get me up more to cost of living, and they weren't able to deliver that. And so I started having to look elsewhere. And so I sadly left radio and got my first IT job on a help desk as a support person. And that started that journey. But yeah, there was that hybrid area of, mass communications that was really a great time. And I really started cutting my teeth, on that. So
I say, so my mother worked at a radio station, and then she got into TV. Mm-hmm. So I believe her role, and this was when I was a kid, this was at least like 30 years ago. She was a traffic supervisor.
Ah, sure.
So when you had mentioned the disc, mm-hmm. right, there were times where I would go with her to the office. And I think at the time, so we were in Michigan, she had just left United Way, and I believe she was at, I can't even think of his name, but he's very famous out of Michigan. I'm too old to remember now, but he was one of the famous DJs.
Okay.
And she was a traffic supervisor.
Okay.
And when I hear traffic, I think of cars driving up and down the street.
Of course, yeah.
It means a different thing in radio.
Very much.
So I thought my mom had a certain job. I thought my mom was like traffic control, like what you think of like with airplanes.
I was going to say, just waving the flashlights, with the orange tips on it.
Yeah, but not necessarily outside, but like more so like at a computer.
Sure.
And one day she takes me to work, and it's myself and my brother, because he's like a couple years older than me. So we're in the studio, and you walk by the glass, the plexiglass or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And you see it says on air, mm-hmm. but there's no one in there. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wait, where's the person at? And she's like, oh, it's just a recording. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, okay. So it's playing a recording. But so she's like, oh, they usually come in on the weekends and they'll record for like different things, and then we'll play it.
Yep.
So there's not a person here. Like, no, they're not here today. They're traveling or whatever. Oh, okay, whatever. So then we walk down this hallway and open a door. And it's imagine like a book, like a library, mm-hmm. like a Blockbuster back in the day. You know how you'd walk in Blockbuster and have every shelf filled with movies?
Absolutely.
It was like that, but they were turned like VHS. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, I'm looking for this one. And she had like a number, almost like a library catalog.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, what are these? She's like, oh, these are commercials. Mm-hmm. People pay us money to play these, and we have to make sure that they're slotted in at the right time, mm-hmm. so that way when it's time to go on air and they're expecting their commercial that mm-hmm. they paid for, it plays correctly.
That's right.
Like, wait, you telling me like a commercial is literally something that someone records and sends to you, and then you just pop it in a tape, or you set up in the computer to schedule it on the time? Yes. And that's when I realized I didn't know anything about radio. So she did that for a while. Then when we moved out here in 2000, she started working for Fox 10.
Okay.
So same kind of thing, but more modern, mm-hmm. right? And by 2000, it wasn't anything like what it was in early 90s when I had seen this stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's when you realize your parents do something, or you have an understanding what they do for work, but you don't really understand what it is that they do until you show up. So I thought it was interesting that you worked at the radio station, because I remember my childhood going in every now and then,
Yeah.
and like seeing these people that were on the radio, because eventually we would see them or meet them. Didn't know who they were, but my mom was like, "Oh, this person's really famous. Like, I wish I could think of the guy's name." But he was out of Detroit, one of the famous DJs. And it was like, "Oh, we got to get a Kiss shirt from him," or something like a
Okay.
Kiss. It might have been like Kiss FM if they're in Detroit. I don't know. And it was just really interesting growing up, and the fact that you had that similar background, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'm curious on like why acting wasn't it. Like if it was me, I know why. I have, what do they call it? A radio, or no, I have an acting voice. No.
Face for radio.
I have a face for radio.
That's what I had to. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So like I mean, I don't look like Brad Pitt, right? Yeah, I might look like broke down George Clooney. But like, maybe the Walmart version of, some famous actor, but I don't consider myself like a 10 out of 10, right? Depending on where I'm at, I might be a 10. But in the general population,
It's all about the surroundings,
yes, in the general population, I'm just average, right? So to me, I find it interesting where, growing up, I wanted to be a doctor, and I went to school. And when I was in high school, I was dating my girlfriend at the time. Her dad was a nuclear, what was his role? He was like a nuclear physicist at ASU. And he actually taught it.
Wow.
So he had a library full of books. And the one thing he always told me was, just go to school for engineering, because if everything else fails, you have an engineering degree and you can fall back on that. Good advice.
It's not bad advice, yeah.
Right? And he was like, minimum you'll exit college and you'll make anywhere between $15,000 and $80,000 a year. He wasn't wrong. Right? So I listened to him, but when I did all my, when I had to pick for what I wanted to go to school for, I remember because there was a Harvard application that I filled out. So I only filled out for ASU, U of A, Harvard, and NAU.
Okay.
Those are the only ones that I filled out for. And on the Harvard application, these are paper applications at the time,
right.
They require that you pick a major. And I didn't have one at the time. I was like, oh, I want to do pre-med, but pre-med isn't necessarily like the thing to do, because what most people don't realize is that you can actually get into med school with any degree. You don't have to have pre-med to get into med school. And if you want to have this background in engineering, pick engineering, and then you go to med school. So on the application, it had all these different degrees that you could pick from, and bioengineering was one of them. I didn't know what the hell it was, but I clicked on it. I did pencil,
Sure.
and I did it. And that's kind of how I found my way into that.
There you go.
And doing that for a little bit out of college for about 4 or 5 years. And then I found sales, and I never looked back. But for you, I find it interesting where like the moment where you realize acting wasn't for you. Like, was it the people? Was it the money? Was it the environment? Like, there had to have been something where you said, like, nah.
It was in my first semester, you take some classes and you start getting into some of the prerequisites for the program. And there's a point where you audition. Okay. And for like the dean of the school and like all the higher up muckety mucks, that are there. And that audition helps to point them to what track you're going to take. Are you going to the 200 level stuff? I mean, are you gonna start advancing? Do they want to invest their time in you right away, or do they feel that we're gonna put you in more of the remedial stuff and everything like that, and just kind of cycle through that? I felt at that time that if I was knowing that the chances were so slim anyway, because so few actors actually make it, to earn a living wage or something like that. And I felt in my mind as a, 18, 19-year-old person, at that point, that if I didn't hit it, if they didn't see that in me to get me to the next level, like right away, and I had seen people who hadn't made it, like I saw who was making it. I saw people that were, oh no, we want to keep you down the beginner's track, that type of thing. And so I kind of was like sizing myself up with them a little bit. And I was like, you know what? So few are getting to that 200 level track right away. And if I don't get there, this probably isn't it for me. I probably don't have as great of a shot as maybe I would like. And that was compounded, I think, at that time for me, like they were looking for certain types of people. Like you were seeing who was advancing, and you were seeing like what they were looking for with that. And I found this in radio too. One thing that works for me, or has worked for me, is my vanilla-ish, or my vanilla-ness. I'm adaptable to different situations. I'm able to kind of work my way in and out. The radio station or the radio company that I worked for had 5 stations in the market, and everyone had a different format. And I was on all 5 stations at one point, and they were all different formats. You had different styles. I had different names for my on-air stuff for everyone.
It's like a different voice too.
Yes, basically, yes. You have a different delivery. You kind of work it, differently for each one as to what's appropriate. The hard rock station was way different than the classical station, which was different from the spiritual station or the classic rock or the modern hits. You adjusted yourself for that area that you're going into. And I was able to do that because, I was very milquetoast, in the middle. And so I was adaptable. That was great. The drawback of that is that I didn't have that it factor of, something that was a bit more, I don't want to say like direct, or like something that people saw as like, oh yeah, they got it. You bring up Brad Pitt, it's like there is something with him, with his delivery, with his look, people like that, where you're just like, boom, that's it. But Brad Pitt's always going to be Brad Pitt whenever he shows up in a role. It's like he's going to change a few things, but it's Brad Pitt behind it. The adaptability is less, but he doesn't have to, because he has made his way and has been so successful in that, as of many, actors and actresses and everything like that. They've done great like that, but they had that factor that really set them apart from everybody. I didn't set myself apart, but I became a very valuable utility person. Okay. And so when I got to that point with the whole acting thing, that's what I came down to in my mind. And so I pretty much kind of turned that off for myself, and I was like, you know what, I think I need to go a different route at this point. And maybe I revisit the whole acting thing later, maybe not, but there's got to be some other things that maybe I can do that my personality and my flexibility, might be more of a benefit,
Yeah. So like if I were to, put it in my words, it's there are people looking for ice cream, and if they want vanilla, they can get vanilla from a lot of different places.
That's
right. But if you want the Rocky Road, or what's the name of this? Coldstone Creamery?
Yeah.
Are they still in business?
They are.
Okay. I haven't been there in years. And, you show up and when I went last, they got to have it. I love it, or I'm addicted, or whatever their sizes are. And they would sit there and they'd mix it up. And there's like some weird concoctions, right? Like, I don't even know what this is.
That's right.
You weren't that flavor, right? So it wasn't like, you weren't like the Rocky Road in the acting world, but you also weren't like the strawberry shortcake. You were kind of like enough in the middle to where you could be mixed, where you can do your own mixing and find yourself like in like the bell curve, right? Like if you like, I guess maybe that's a better way to describe it, is like in terms of a bell curve, you had like characteristics and qualities that kind of fit you in the middle, but there was a lot of other people in that room, right? So so sticking out is a lot harder. Whereas if you're on the top 1 percentile of, we'll say, variability or what's different, right? You stick out way more, like Brad Pitt.
Exactly.
I guess that makes sense. Like if you kind of look at it from an odds perspective, like what's the probability that, you'll make it to the next phase? If there's a lot more people that, would you say there's a lot of people that you would consider vanilla? Kind of like how you considered yourself, or?
No, I saw a lot more people who were who either had that rocky road factor or were trying to develop and maybe force a rocky road factor. Like they would keep going with that, and some were successful, some weren't, but they were really trying to set themselves apart. So they didn't really have that. And so that's where I found myself going like, you know what? I get what they're doing, but maybe I should be. Maybe I'm supposed to be the vanilla that more toppings can go with, and you can actually have a good concoction come out of it. And I thought maybe that is a strength of mine. Maybe I should lean into that and see how far that'll take me into something. And, for a while, like what I said, when I got into radio, that really served a good purpose for me and got me to do, got me to spend some time in a major market, at that point. So I'm very happy about that. And I think there are a lot of people who would look at my story and say, well, you shut it down too fast, or you didn't try hard enough, you could have really gutted it out, you should have moved to New York or LA and just kind of pounded the pavement and gone to every audition. Yeah, probably, I guess I could have done that, but there was just something in my mind at the time that said, you know what, probably not, but hey, here's a facet of me, maybe I should go explore this, and that's what I ended up doing.
Okay. That's interesting though, because essentially if you were to take a step back and say, well, if you could pick a TV show, either on air today, streaming, does anyone say on air anymore? Probably not. Anything that's streaming or on TV where you would be the main character, right? Now, keep in mind, it has to be after 2000 for me specifically to understand.
Right.
So anything after 2000, so like Grey's Anatomy, right? That's a good one. I used to watch that one when I was in high school. Soap opera, no, actually not soap opera, like a TV show, like actual series where you were the main character. What show could we put you in? Or what show would you want to be the main character for?
That's an excellent question, and it is a challenge for me because, again, I've had this like vanilla Swiss Army knife tool type of mindset for so long. I've always seen myself as the sidekick character. I thought like if I was ever going to make it, I was going to be the sidekick on a show,
So we'll pick a sidekick then.
I still don't have one because I'd have to think about that one. Maybe we'll come back to that. But it's a very interesting question, and I think I've probably shelved that for so long that I really haven't brought that one out. But yeah, let me think about that one. See if I can come up with something good.
I'll tell you mine.
Okay, yeah, please.
Did you ever watch Desperado?
Yes. Yeah.
I actually have a case right over there.
Oh, dude.
You see it right by the door?
Yeah.
The cello case?
Yeah.
So that's the case that this cello goes in.
Okay.
It's just over there for now. But when I was growing up, I was playing the violin, and then I moved to the cello in high school, and cello and bass actually. In junior high, 8th grade, 7th grade, I moved to cello. But from 5th grade, 6th grade, I started on the violin. And I remember watching that movie. The guy's got the case with the guns in it, pop, 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 pop. And then he's like walking away and it's blowing up behind him. And he had long hair. I had long hair for a second too.
Oh, did you?
I did. I had a man bun. People, looked at me weird. I eventually cut it off, but I had long hair for a while, and it would go down to like the middle of my back.
Wow.
But it was only on the top, so the sides were kind of like a fade.
Okay.
But maybe that was just my way of having like that look of the Antonio Banderas, where if I were to be in a movie, it would be like walking around with a cello case, like as an assassin or whatever they were, just like the badasses, and just boom, 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 right, open it up and the machine guns pull out. Right, that's kind of where I see myself. So I'm just asking for where you see yourself, because
no, that would be cool. Now that you say that, the one that pops into my head is, and this is complete dream wish, and I apparently grew up in the wrong country for that, but one of the James Bonds. I think that was something that I always aspired to, to a certain degree. Like I thought that was like the ultimate cool. Now, I think nowadays there are certain behaviors of James that maybe aren't as great as they were thought to be in the 60s and 70s, but by and large, there are elements of, that type of person that I admire some aspects of that. And so I think I'm a definite wannabe, and, to be able to go through that. And I absolutely could not get enough of the Daniel Craig movies. I appreciate every single James Bond that went through the film history and everything like that. But the way that Daniel Craig played him with all of the faults, all of the irregularities, all the things, all the challenges that he went through during the course of the movies, culminating, in the last one, where he basically just gave it all up, and which was like a brilliant ending to his 5 movies as that character. That really hit home to me when he took over that role. And I liked the other ones. They were very glossy James Bonds, your Roger Moore, even your Timothy Dalton, and of course Pierce Brosnan when he did it. They were very shiny. They were very polished. Very royal. They could be knighted by the Queen at any given moment, and it was a different look at that. I appreciate all of the different takes that have been on there, but the Daniel Craig take really hit home with me because I think it's it was the most real one that I saw. It was the most human one that I saw, but yet he was still able to do these things. Yes, they're movie things, but they were things nonetheless. And that I'd be like, yeah, man, that would be me, a flawed person still being able to come out and save the world, or whatever, and defeat the bad guy, something like that. That would be something that would be really awesome if I ever had the opportunity to do that. But I think at best I would probably be the American FBI character that, or CIA character that would be he'd link up with to go search out, somebody from Spectre or something like that. So
yeah, you got to give yourself some more credit, because it sounds like you want to be the. You ever watch Marvel movies?
Oh yeah.
What's the guy that's the Shield, the main Shield guy that dies that Loki kills or kind of kills? Agent.
Oh, yeah. What's his name? I can see his face, and now the name is escaping me.
Yeah.
Is it Coulson?
Coulson.
Yeah.
Coulson. Yeah, Agent Coulson.
Yeah.
So there's Bond and there's Coulson.
Yeah.
You gotta be Bond, man. You gotta be, I can see that. So I've never actually seen. So the James Bonds that I'm familiar with are the Sean Connery.
Oh yeah.
Because my parents like them.
Mm-hmm.
The last James Bond that I actually saw from beginning to end was Pierce Brosnan.
Okay.
Right. And I never really got into James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you say that,
mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix or like Prime or
Sure.
something that we pay for, like some sort of service. I'll have to watch one because I've never actually watched, like, I think you call it Good Time to Die, No Time to Die.
Yeah, No Time to Die, yeah.
Never Dying.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Die Hard, where there's like, it's just the word die and hard are in there somewhere. So it's very similar, but I've never actually seen a newer Bond movie.
Okay.
So when you're describing all this stuff, I'm not familiar with the character.
Okay.
So now I'm interested to go see.
Yeah.
Right. But I've never really got into it. I think what it was is seeing the Pierce
mm-hmm.
version of him,
mm-hmm.
where he's like in a boat and he like flies out the water and he flies in the air, like spins, like does a 360,
mm-hmm.
somehow lands and the boat has wheels, and then all of a sudden it's driving. And then it's got rockets on there, and you're just like, "Come on, man!"
You see that every day. I mean, it's so commonplace.
Yeah, it's like, give me something that's realistic, and then I flip the channel and then I watch Star Wars.
Yeah, right.
Like
perfect.
Like just make it 100% fake, right? Or maybe not even, but like even like the Marvel movies, like
mm-hmm.
the Iron Man, like I know they're fake, or Transformers, like James Bond is too fake for me, but I watch Transformers any day. I mean, maybe it's because I know it's 100% fake and it's not ever any part realistic.
Right.
Whereas James Bond kind of like blurs the line of what's never happening
mm-hmm.
into what's everyday life.
True.
And if I'm going to live in a fantasy world, I just want a 100% fantasy world
mm-hmm.
of just like cars that talk
mm-hmm.
and shoot rockets out, versus a guy that's just like me driving a car that can do that.
Yeah.
So I'll have to, and so the newer ones are less like the older ones, or less like the Pierce Brosnan ones.
Yeah, I think they still have their share of gadgets
mm-hmm.
that come out, but I mean, when you look at the stunt work, you look at the the vehicles and the things that they utilize and everything like that. I think it's a little bit more down to earth than some of the other ones where you know they haven't really aged all that well when you look at the gadgets and everything that Cube brings up for him. So.
It's like he's got the cell phone in his shoe. And you're like,
Right, yeah. Then you get into the whole Get Smart version of it. Yeah, that's right.
Or like Inspector Gadget.
Oh yeah.
He had the Apple Watch before Apple Watch was even out.
That's just crazy,
isn't it? Because he used to have it go like this, where he had the antennas come out of his gloves.
Mm-hmm.
Now you just kind of
hello, just tilt your wrist a little bit, and then now we've got it.
Okay,
yeah.
So you would be like the Agent Coulson, but if you had your choice, the Daniel Craig Bond.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, I'm total wannabe for that.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Me too with Desperado. Yeah. So
no, it makes sense.
I think everyone kind of envisions things like if I've never asked that question to anyone because I've never really thought about that.
Sure.
But it is interesting to think of it and where I would be, the first thing that I would go to would probably be like Desperado, and then after that it'd probably be Iron Man. I don't know if you saw my helmet up there, but I
do see it up there.
I have a fully functioning Iron Man helmet.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
Actually, I have that because of COVID. So you remember when, COVID happened and everyone had to wear a mask?
Yep.
I got so tired of wearing like the mesh mask or just whatever mask because I was like, man, this is just the dumbest thing ever. Like these masks don't really stop anything, right?
Right.
Unless they're a certain type of mask. And then those are hard to get. So, if I'm going to just put a bed sheet over my face, I might as well be like a cool bed sheet. And so I found one of those online in China, I believe, for like $500.
Oh, wow.
And I convinced myself that it was the only mask I was ever going to have to wear because I didn't know how long COVID was going to last,
right.
But I figured it'd last at least another year or so from when I first bought that. So I bought it and that's what I wore around to like the grocery stores. So I would walk around and it would fully cover my face. And I was the weirdo that was walking around in an Iron Man mask. But at the same time, it's like, well, everyone else just wearing like a tissue over their face. And, some people had more extravagant, like the KN95s and like some of the higher end.
Yeah, for sure.
But we never really had that.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be cool just to wear one of those. And then people wouldn't, they wouldn't see me. They wouldn't know who I was. I even played poker in that a couple times. So you know how like say give no tells, like no bluffing, or like if you're bluffing, like your eye might twitch or something.
That's right.
I actually wore that in Texas because we lived there for a couple of times in the poker room, and people like hated it because they can't see you.
Right.
And it's motorized, so you can actually like tap the ear, and the top opens.
Okay.
So when you're waiting for your cards or you're playing, before you actually start betting, I would just like tap the ear and then
come down, yeah.
And then the lights would turn on. You couldn't see, so there was no reads. And people complained about it, and then
I'm sure
they made me like take it off, and then I played it again. And I was playing with friends, so they knew it was me, and they thought it was funny. But yes, so when it comes to movies, Desperado first. I've already got the case, right? I've got the cello.
Yeah, you were prepared. Yeah,
I've got the cello case. But if we were to choose something else after that, probably Iron Man. One, because he's got all the money.
Oh, absolutely.
Two, he's got the looks. Three, he's got the gadgets, right? It's just a perfect combo. So you found your way into tech.
Yes.
I guess when you originally started, security wasn't what it is today.
No.
So how did you kind of find? I mean, I looked through your history, right? So I kind of have an idea of how you kind of found security, but like, what gave you the foresight initially to kind of lean into security versus other areas?
I was volunteered for my first security position.
So voluntold.
Yes, I theoretically had an option to say no, thank you, but yeah, there was a push. I was pushed. I don't know, something like that. Shoved in a direction. When I had gotten out of radio, I had gotten my first support job, and I was third level support, and then my boss, the help desk manager, he moved up to be like systems admin manager type of person, so more in the infrastructure side. So I interviewed for and got the help desk manager position, and so I was running the help desk for a while, and our company had a virus scare. And this was, people didn't really know a lot about what a virus does and what it could do and what it looked like. And there was no idea of like signatures or anything like the stuff that Mike does, and stuff that a lot of people do, of just being able to pull it apart, know how it ticks and everything like that. It was all a big unknown at that point, at least for the crew that I was working with.
So this was like early 2000s.
Yeah, freaked them out. Yeah, absolutely. And so they were so freaked out that at one point, after they figured out it was a false positive in the end, something was just malfunctioning, but it scared them enough. And, just kind of reading up on it and learning about, how this stuff was starting to hit and how ill prepared a lot of companies, including ours, was for something like this. My boss and my peers got together without me and basically said, we probably should have a security person and start up a security, like an official security program here. What should we do? And they all decided to throw my name in the hat, and I was the only piece of paper in the hat. So when they pulled it out, it had my name on it.
So everyone, it was like Survivor, where everyone votes.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you have a vote?
I did not. I didn't know this was occurring until my boss pulled me into his office
and said, we voted?
Yes. And said, we voted, we got together, we voted, and we feel that you should be the security person for our company.
But everyone voted, and they just put your name in the hat. So they didn't really vote. They basically just picked you. But they
yes, they did.
Okay, so they had a vote.
They had a vote.
But it wasn't really a vote.
No.
Okay.
It was a selection process.
It was due diligence.
Yeah. Something like that. Whatever they want to call it, that's what they did. So
okay.
Yeah. So I had no idea any of this was happening until my boss pulled me in and kind of made that announcement and said, think about it. And I didn't know much of anything about the discipline at that point, and so I started like talking to people and reading up on it and just kind of seeing that, security was starting to grow, like the presence, the idea of a formal program. We were in the healthcare space. It was an assisted living company that I was working for. And so you have over the top of that, the regulations that you have to comply with. And so there's a HIPAA security rule that you got to deal with. And I think in those days, I saw a lot of IT departments just taking it. And they're like, okay, it's another thing we have to do. It's a box we have to check. So, okay, I've got this, and we encrypt this, and we do this. And, and they just basically went down the rule and said, check this, check this, check this. And okay, we're compliant, with it. But it was really becoming something different at that point, but it was still a bit of an unknown. And so I wasn't sure if that was the route that I wanted to take. And so one by one, I went around to my peers and I basically said, hey, can I talk to you? Why did you pick me? What was this about? What were you thinking? And there were 5 in the management team, that I spoke with, and 4 of them, very nice, great people, but they gave me kind of the corporate answers. Oh, really think your skill set would be, a great match for blah, 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 everything. So then I went to our database manager and I said, hey man, why this? He goes, you're the only one that doesn't take any shit from anybody. And that's what we need in this role. We need somebody who can stand up for what they believe in, for what they know is right, and, can lay it out. And you're going to be on an island, in a lot of cases, and you're not going to say the most popular things, but you're the best one out of this group that has a shot at actually achieving something. That swayed me into trying out security as a profession. And so then I accepted the position. I became a security architect for the company, and, I relinquished my leadership over the help desk, and that's how things got started. And so I was very raw and knew some technical stuff at the time, but the security concepts were, I was very green at all of that. And so I tried, I worked as hard as I could to kind of go into that route and figure out, like, okay, how do I what's my foray? What are my first steps into this? How do I, make this my own and figure this whole thing out kind of in stride,
Mm-hmm.
you're not starting from, oh, I'm going to school, but there's really no dependency on me. No, the train's moving. I have to run and jump on, but it's like, okay, how do I do that and, get the buy-in to do what we're going to need to do for this? And so I just tried to start figuring it out. But those were also times where, and I think it's still this way now, but it was definitely that way where security was a nice to have. It wasn't a must have,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of cases. And found that out, the hard way at my company. It was difficult to get support at times. It was difficult to get buy-in on things that we needed to do, regardless of what evidence that I would kind of bring to the table for it. There was a lot of difficulty for it. And I was very young. I was not, a mature, seasoned professional at that point, and I didn't know the ins and the outs of working in a corporate environment, and so, I tried. I did what I could. Some stuff worked, some stuff didn't. But in the end, the company, after a couple of years of kind of working my way through and starting to build the program, they went through bankruptcy, and one of the last acts that they had coming out of it, they handled it successfully, but one of the last things they did coming out of that was they terminated the positions of a few of us, and I was one of them. And so they just absorbed security into IT and had their network architect, who extremely knowledgeable guy, great guy. I learned a ton from him. He ended up just kind of like absorbing that into his role. And so then, I jumped on this island, and all of a sudden I'm being pushed out, into the middle of the water. And I'm like, okay, now where do I go from here? And I wasn't seeing a lot of positions open at that time because, again, it was in the market that I was in. It wasn't a huge one, and the security discipline, I don't think at the companies that actually were financially, adequate at that time or successful, the programs were not. It wasn't that big, there wasn't really a lot going on. And so I was kind of floating for a bit, I was unemployed for like 5 months at that point. And so that was like, did I make the right choice? Then I'm questioning myself. It's like, did I make the right choice? Did I put myself out here and I should have just stuck with the help desk, or I should have just stuck with something more conventional in tech so that I could keep a job,
Yeah, what's interesting is, so one of the last guests, or not, he's like 3 guests ago, one of the things that he had talked about was how security kind of evolved as a result of certain leaders doing their best. Not, I have to listen back to his episode because it hasn't been edited yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to kind of rephrase it,
Mm-hmm.
so this is not what he said.
Mm-hmm.
What I took away from it is that the security role, or the role of a security professional, kind of came about as a result of people in information technology, right, doing their best to push the burden or push the accountability on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the role developed, and from what I took from his conversation was that essentially it's not necessarily a scapegoat, but it's someone that can be held accountable for the actions of others as a way of shielding themselves, right? And I don't know, I don't have enough of opinion or experience to say that that's where it came from. But when I hear your story, the first thing I thought of is there was people in this room, 5 people in a room. They were scared. What are they supposed to do? Well, no one wants to take the fall. Let's just vote and we'll figure out who's responsible for security. It just won't be any of us. Right. So a lot of the, I was able to draw a lot of parallels from kind of what he described as, what he saw the role developing from, and kind of what your experience was to say, I mean, there's definitely some similarities there. Not to say that that's where it came from. I think there's a lot of value in security, but in the 2000s, I think it's really hard for people to quantify how important security was to a business. Whereas if it's 2025, realistically now in the next few weeks, there is a I'll say a tangible difference between the way people view security today versus when what they viewed it in 2000.
Completely.
And that's the, that's evolution, right, of the
For sure.
practice. But I do find it interesting that you had no say, you weren't involved with it in any way,
Mm-hmm.
and you were basically told that this is your role,
Mm-hmm.
but the requirements for the role are basically undefined. It's kind of just out the boat into the water,
Mm-hmm.
maybe with a raft, maybe without a raft. So when you're without a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can imagine what that's like, where it's like my situation was I quit a job making really good money,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went to having no job, right? And there's been a lot of times where I sit there, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just like staring at the wall, like thinking to myself, like, I can't sleep. I don't know what I did. Like, why would I quit a job that, with golden handcuffs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or why would I do something this stupid? But yet I find myself still doing that, right? And you will say continuing that. So I know what it's like to kind of like contemplate
Mm-hmm.
your choices.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's more or less, I think I saw maybe potential, right, in myself. Maybe potential in my abilities, or, what I envisioned was possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I chalk it up to say, like, maybe I believed in myself enough to take a leap of faith,
Mm-hmm.
and go down that path. And I guess for you, like, when you were out of a job
Mm-hmm.
for 5 months, did you ever get to the point where you were like broke?
Oh yeah.
Like define broke.
I was young at the time. I was in a instant family relationship, meaning, I started dating a woman that I was going to end up marrying, and she had a 3-year-old daughter at the time. And so I
Okay.
became, during the time where I was doing okay and everything, I was employed and everything was fine, that was great. I could support, we were living on our own. We were just kind of like starting our little family. And then when that all went down, I used up every bit of credit that I had, every ounce of the severance that they gave me.
Mhm.
I had hoped that by the time my runway had finished up at the other place, I would be able to, I'd have something else kind of, ready to go. And that just didn't materialize despite, my best efforts. And so I was scraping through, finding change in the sofa cushions.
Yeah.
I'm bleeding everything out. I'm trying to find every way to sell things and to make a little money here and there, doing side jobs, odd jobs type of thing, just to stay afloat until I could get to something. And sadly, the effects of that time stuck with me. And I was never, I didn't realize it at the time. I thought, oh, after 5 months, I finally did get employed. But I didn't realize at that moment how difficult it was going to be for me to get out of that. There was always going to be remnants of that ended up kicking my ass later down the road. But yeah, it was depending on family members for, loans or, loans. But in some cases there were, some cases they were gifts. They were extremely generous and in helping us out and making our way, to get to a point to where I could, get back on my feet. And we barely got through it. But yeah, it was skipping mortgage payments. You're trying to pay this to I'm going to delay this bill so I can pay this bill this month and not have the power shut off or anything like that. I mean, it was really, really down bottom of the barrel type of thing, and just trying to do everything possible to just it's like Titanic, just gonna hang on to the door as best I can.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of room on there, but it's like just you're doing what you can, and the waters are icy and everything, and it's not a good situation, and many people go through that, and I feel for them. I really do, because in my own little way for that period of time, that was how I had to live.
Yeah.
And it'd be one thing if it was just myself, but I had other people depending on me too, so it was not cool. But thankfully, by the skin of our teeth, we made it through, and then I was able to start working again. So
Did you ever get to the point where the bank account had the minus sign on it?
absolutely, yeah,
You did.
without question, yeah.
Yeah. I worked at a bank for a little bit, and I saw it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that would not necessarily frustrating, but the one thing that I always fought to help people with was, and this was back in 2006 or 7 time, before a lot of the like legislative changes happened with the banking world and the fees and things like that, was when when the bank would process transactions, they would process largest to smallest, right? Really good example is the mortgage, your car payment. Those are probably the two most expensive, right? And typically, like your mortgage might be at the time for most people it was probably like $1,200. Car payment might be $500, and then everything else kind of falls in line behind it. Now, in a case where you had $800 in your account, right? They would take out that $1,300 first. Bam, $36 fee.
Yep.
$500 car payment, bam, another fee. And then 10 other transactions that total up maybe like $200. And now there's another $400 in fees. So you would walk out, people would walk into the bank, like, well, I don't understand. I had the money, and it always turned into, well, we have to look at the transactions. And luckily I worked with a lady, her name was Jerica, and we worked at Compass Bank. And whenever people would come in, she wasn't in a similar situation, but she had some similar struggles in her personal situation. So she was a lot more lenient with these people because it wasn't her putting the fees on their account. It was just the way that the bank worked. And I remember whenever it happened, I would always go to her because she was the customer service manager, like CSM, I think was the role at the time. And I was just to tell her, I'd say, hey, Jerica, have all these fees. And she would just, because she had been in that situation personally for herself, she would write up these tickets and these GL credits and give them the money back and just said, hey, like, please next time make sure that whatever comes out, they're going to take the largest first. So the minute you see that or that coming, please, like structure like your transactions so that way you're aware of what comes out and your payment will always come first. The house payment will always come first. And then, of course, the bank said, we're doing it as a courtesy. The most important bill, we wouldn't want you to be homeless. And I wouldn't want you to be homeless, so we're going to pay your mortgage and then your car payment so you can drive to your work.
Right.
And then, of course, charge you $400 in fees. And, at the time, for some people, that could have been a week's worth of work. We'll just assume like $10 an hour at 40 hours, right? $400 in fees. Boom. Like after taxes, you're making $280, $300.
Right.
So you wipe off a whole 40 hours of someone's life because of how you decided to, process the transactions.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I've seen that, right? And my parents, even growing up, were a lot of the same ways. And I didn't know it at the time, but there were times I always wore like undershirts, like the white like tank tops. And I've always worn them probably from teenager on.
Okay.
Right. And there was one time we would go to the store and I would say, hey, Mom, can we get some bleach? Because, you got to bleach the whites.
Of course.
And she's like, oh, no, we don't have money for that. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't know how much bleach costs. And we'll say as an adult, when I finally moved out, I have to go buy bleach. I remember the first time I ever bought bleach. It was at a Winco off of Pecos and Val Vista.
Okay.
So you walked in and I was like, because at the time, my parents lived right on the corner. So I was leaving their house and I was like, I'm going to go buy some bleach. Because I had moved in with my now wife and she needs bleach because we're going to wash whites. Right? I got to wash my tank tops, my undershirts. And I remember when it hit me because I walked by, and Winco's fairly cheap as it is. But I walked by like this, they had a whole pile of bleach. And it was like $1.68 or maybe $2.68. It was less than $5.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself, wait, why did my mom say we didn't have money for bleach? Right? And it was like less than $5. And I assume 10 years prior, it would have been maybe like a third of the cost or, whatever fraction less. And it hit me. I was like, man, we must have been really poor.
Yeah, it really puts it in perspective, an event like that to kind of bring it all home. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So my dad, he would always, and so here's another thing too. And I've done this with my kids. It's different situations. Like I'm more like lazy. And so sometimes you have to pay with things in cash. I don't feel like going to the bank. And until recently, I never really walked around with cash in general. It's just like credit cards, debit cards.
Sure.
So when I have to do something, like my wife signs us up for something, or I need to go buy eggs, right, from a buddy of mine that has his own farm, like a ranch where he has chickens, and they, his daughter sells eggs. I might need like $20. So I asked my kids, hey, let me get $20 real quick. And they make their own money through like painting and like selling art supplies at like local fairs and stuff that my wife signs them up for. But I borrowed $20 from my kids, right? But it was because I was just lazy and didn't feel like going to the bank.
Sure.
There were times when I was a kid, my parents, because I would always get really good grades, and other family members would pay me for my A's. I'd have a few $100s at a time. And I would, hey, like, and this was back when we lived in Michigan, so this was pre-2000. It was hey, Nando, hey, let me get like $20 real quick. And I'm like, oh, sure, right? I have $20.
Sure.
Here's $20. Or, hey, like, do you have any money? Like, yeah. Well, hey, let me get that until next Wednesday or Friday, whatever the day was. And as a kid, you just think to yourself, okay. But like, you don't realize.
No, right.
Like my parents' favorite, my dad's, one of his favorite meals was Salisbury steak, which came in a red box that you could buy for like $4.99 from the freezer section. And I never liked it, but I also never went shopping and never bought it. So I didn't know what it was.
Sure.
It was like Salisbury steak and potatoes. And that was like good eating, right?
Right.
Or when it was my birthday, I always, where do you want to go for your birthday dinner? And I would always pick like Popeyes or an Asian restaurant. I'd always pick these random places. And that's like going to Chick-fil-A today, or like just going to grab a burger. And at the time, it was the only time we went there was on a special occasion. So thinking like fast food was special occasion.
Right.
And kind of looking back at it, I think a lot of me personally is a better person because of that, because you don't, you're not giving something so often that you become not ungrateful for it, but you appreciate it less. But, the dollar is like the ultimate like denomination, or what is it? The ultimate like equalizer in the world. Like without the dollar, there's nothing. And just looking back thinking like, oh man, I remember loaning my dad $20 or only going to these restaurants for special things, and kind of thinking about it, I was like, man, we must have really been in a situation that, my parents did a really good job at hiding from us. But I do remember like my dad, he would have a little notepad where he would have all the bills listed and how much they cost or how much it was due and when he was going to pay them. So it was, you choose this bill over this one. And at the time I'm thinking, oh, he's just kind of he has a plan. He has like an agenda, but you don't necessarily, as a kid under 12, you don't really think of it like, well, he's doing that because he doesn't have the money to pay the other bills first. Right. And I think a big part of that, growing up that way kind of put me in a situation where you kind of like grasp at everything you have.
Yeah.
You don't ever want to let go of what you have. So when we moved out here and I started working at CDW, one of the managers, he would always make fun of me. He's like, you're so cheap. You're so cheap. Oh, you're so cheap. Yeah. You never spend $1 on this, or you'll never do that. And I don't think he was like intentionally trying to make fun of me. It was just something that he had noticed, but he never really understood like my dad was paying bills one at a time,
right? Or
that my parents were borrowing $20 from me to help cover their bills, or that my parents couldn't afford bleach. And I think if a lot of people look at a situation or a person in a certain situation, I think, why doesn't he do certain things? Like, why doesn't he ever spend money? And they never take the time to ask. Like, no one would ever understand that.
Oh yeah.
So I appreciate that story because it kind of reminds me a lot of my story, right? The story that I wasn't aware that I was living.
Sure. Yeah.
So you got through 5 months.
Yep.
Bank account was red.
Oh yeah.
Bank account negative.
Yeah, absolutely.
did you ever like forego eating because of that?
There were a lot of very, very inexpensive meals made at my place. Macaroni and cheese made its way into the house, quite often. My daughter thought that was fantastic. It is, oh, this is great. I love this.
Kids love that.
Oh yeah, it's great. But there were a lot of moments where, I would make dinner and she would eat, and my girlfriend then, who became my wife, she would eat, and then I would eat what was left. I didn't necessarily make something for myself.
Yeah.
I would eat the leftovers. And, you talk about, how you grew up in kind of the family world. Like, I grew up right across the lake from you in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I'm very glad that I did. There were a lot of life lessons, that I learned there, work ethic, and, the value of a dollar, and a lot of things that are inherent in people like my family who grew up there that I consider hugely valuable to this day. And you learn just how to make your way through, because not every minute's going to be a good one. It's like there's going to be some downtimes and everything like that. And so you just kind of gut it out, as best you can. And I was raised by a very giving family, a very much like, hey, I'll help you out however you can, type of people. They were very good about that. And I had learned, I wish I had learned it at a more healthy level. I think I took it to the extreme, but it was putting other people in front of yourself, like thinking of them, of others first before you, take care of you. Chefs eat last, like that type of thing. It's like, it's that hierarchy of like, make sure your guests are good first, and then you can take care of that. And that's kind of how I manipulated that. I think I pegged the needle a little far, for sure. I wasn't very balanced in that, but the results worked out. We got through it, and we did the fish sticks and tater tots nights, and we did the what can I make, the lasagna, pan lasagna that'll last for days, that type of thing. And but the ingredients inside of it were not very expensive. You just found ways to make things last and stretch them out, and figure out how you're going to get to the next the next go around. And that's what we did, and we just worked together to get there. But it was pretty lean.
Potatoes. You add potatoes to the meat.
Oh, yeah.
Got to add potatoes to the hamburger meat to make it last longer, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, man. When you said that, my parents always made lasagna growing up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I know why.
Yeah.
Right.
It just, and mine did too. And they were very good. My dad ran his own business in a small farming community. And so it was part of the family business, but, he ran his kind of anchor of it. And so they took care of us, like I didn't feel the strain, that families actually like yours did, based on your story. But there was a definite consciousness of the meaning of a dollar, how to get full value out of something that you get. The jeans got a rip in it. Mom's going to put a patch on it, baby. It's like, absolutely, we're going to make that thing run as long as we can. It's like asset value. It's like, you look at it in the corporate world now, it's like depreciation. It's like, I'm going to get that thing 7 years. It's like, that's going to live that long, and I'm going to get the value out of it for what I paid for it. And there was that kind of mindset, and you saw that, examples of that, time and time again with that. But and they were really, really good at that. But yeah, I think during that time frame, I was at a different level. I was on a different plane than what my parents had experienced, at least as far as I can tell. But I knew many people that would run into that as well, unfortunately. And you just gotta you do what you gotta do to dig out of it, especially when people are depending on you. So.
Yeah. I think I forgot about patches, but as soon as you said when you get a hole, like I would have patches like from random like NASA patches or just, I don't even know if they sell patches anymore, but my brother is older than me by about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and he's a little bit heavier than me, right? we would go in like Robinson's May or J.C. Penney, and we go to the husky section, right? It wasn't a dog or a tool company at the time. It was the type of pants that you wore.
That's right.
So I just pick husky pants, and I would always get his hand-me-downs.
Right.
Right. So like Christmas would come around, and I could expect new underwear, socks, and here's a funny story. So underwear, socks, and like a sweater, right, or of some sort, like every Christmas. And I have like a photo album that my parents gave me where it's got pictures of like different Christmas days, and there's one where I'm sitting in like a pile of like underwear, like brand new underwear. And I'm just looking at the camera, and you could tell I'm just like, I'm over it. And so I now have 2 daughters. And I remember the first time I was in charge of Christmas shopping, but it was like, hey, you need to do some, get some stuff for the kids. I'm like, okay, cool. Buy socks and underwear, right? It's what people get, I thought.
Sure. Right.
And my wife like lost it on me because she goes, those are things that you should be buying for the kids outside of a holiday. That's like necessity. And here I am thinking like, well, this is what I got for Christmas. Right.
Right.
What do you mean? Like, what? So I'm used to, having a Christmas where we would get stuff like that. And to me, I didn't think anything of it. But with her, in the picture now, we have 2 daughters. It's like I can never buy underwear or socks or anything that would be like a day-to-day necessity for the kids. Like I couldn't buy them deodorant and throw it in a box.
Right.
I can't buy them hairspray or a brush, put it in a box. That's just like, that should have been done before the holidays.
Sure.
So it's kind of been a learning process for me. But, now it's like, oh, I guess it kind of makes sense. But, I still I wish I could buy some, $20 pack of underwear and just like, here you go. But Christmas doesn't work like that for everyone.
Right.
But that was my Christmas. And one year we got a PlayStation, right? So that was a pretty cool one.
Yeah.
That's probably the one Christmas that I do remember because we got Game Day 98 and we ended up getting a bunch of other games. But Game Day 98 was like the Madden before Madden.
Right.
And it had Jerome Bettis on the front where he's like in the Steelers, the white cover.
Yeah.
That was what we got in Detroit as like probably our best Christmas ever. But moving out to Arizona, I remember like, how like winter break and then you go back in January? Well, a lot of times we didn't necessarily get new clothes. Like nowadays the kids, go home for winter break, they come back in January and they're fresh, they're, as the kids say, they're dripping, right?
Right.
They're dripping in style. And I never had that. I never got that, right? And I remember grabbing some bleach if we had it and like taking a rag to my shoes, just
scrubbing them, best you can,
make them bad boys like new.
Yeah.
But it's because I didn't get a new pair of shoes. So there were definitely, aspects of, my, we'll say growing up, my childhood where I tried to make the most of it.
Yeah.
But I've always thought back like, it's probably made me a better person because you kind of come to appreciate the dollar. And I think for me, it's more so time of the time exchange. Like for the longest time I looked at, money as time. Like how much, if I'm going to spend this much money, how much would it take me to make it again? And then that kind of becomes crippling too, right? Because your scales change based on how much you make, and it's just like it's worth more or less. But you made it out, right? You said the 3-year-old. So you're now married to the same person still, or no?
No, that happened down the line as well. So yeah, it was an interesting travel from then on because I became an auditor basically at that point. That was how I got back into the job market.
Okay.
At that point in time, that's when Sarbanes-Oxley for public companies blew up. Like
so SOX compliance.
It just oh my God, everybody had to have a SOX audit. Everybody did, and there were companies that also had they were healthcare or healthcare adjacent or something like that as well. And so because I had experience with those rules, they brought me on as an auditor, and so I learned how to be an IT auditor, and I got a great bit of exposure to so many different industries because didn't matter. It doesn't matter what industry you are. If you're a public company, you know, you need to be audited, you know, and so they would bring us in to do that as the external auditors and really cut my teeth and learn from some really great people on staff how to do that. And that was great exposure for me to the administrative side of the security function. You know, it's like you learn about policies, you learn about procedures, you learn about documenting and auditing and you know, logs and records and everything like that, and going through and you have to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing, you know, and everything like that, and how that all stacks up. And I was able to see, like, very, very rapidly with each engagement that I went to. And then, you know, in the second year, I'd come back around to some of these same places and to see how they're doing. And you get to learn about, you know, the value that leadership puts on that function. You know, are they there to just check a box, or do they really believe in what, you know, they're doing with the program, and they want to make it stronger, and they want to, you know, do the right thing as best they can. And it was a very focused, concentrated injection of, you know, that side of security, of the compliance side, of the governance side. And, you know, I was traveling a little bit. Now, granted, I didn't have to do much out of state, but there was we called it like the triangle in Wisconsin. I was in the Milwaukee area, then you had Green Bay in the north, and then you had Madison out west. And in that triangle were all the big companies that we went to, you know, so easily within driving distance for me, but there were times where I would have to stay overnight, you know, at moments. And that made it a little bit hard on the family side, but we got our way through that. And, you know, but I was able to get myself back on my feet again. During that time, I got married to my then wife there, and I also went through and adopted my daughter. And, you know, we had a nice little family. And, you know, then I'm working through professionally and realizing this is great experience for me, you know, auditing. And I'm really glad that, you know, I had the opportunity and I learned so much, and, you know, the value of how to write a document. That was one of my biggest takeaways out of that 2 years that I spent as an auditor. The value of documentation, the value of grammar, the value of, you know, how that works, and everything that goes through that. My supervisor was a great teacher of that, and he scrutinized everything that I wrote, and I hated to be wrong. I hated to get the red marks on it. It just bothered the hell out of me, because it's like, I don't want to, I want this to come back clean. If you want to change some of the content and things like that because you'd like it to read a certain way, I totally get that. But I didn't want to forget a comma. I didn't want to, like, you know, misspace. I didn't want to, like, make those, you know, construction mistakes of a document. That just really, really bothered me. I wanted to get that right. And so I learned a lot about how to write business documents, especially for, you know, auditing and security during that time. And I took a lot out of that. I was not going, with a family at home, with a young family at home, I was not going to be an auditor for very long, because if I really wanted to go anywhere with that, you know, in the role that I was in, I was going to have to travel more. And that was going to be difficult with a young daughter at home. And my wife had a lot of medical issues as well. And that took time, that took energy, and it took money. And so I realized that I could not sustain even with the limited traveling that I was doing, and pay enough attention to what needed to be taken care of at home. And so I then realized that I needed to find something that was a bit more stable. And so then I moved on from that. But I'm very glad that I was an auditor for that time. It really helped me out a ton and gave me an exposure that, you know, I probably wouldn't have had at a lot of other places.
But you also probably got to see a lot of the things where people cutting corners.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So one of the guests that we had on, Rich Owen, right? His book is actually right there.
Yeah.
Shout out to Rich. One of the things that he said that really stuck with me was, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think I've got the gist of it, is compliance is a result of solid foundational security practices,
Absolutely.
right? And I never really thought about it like that before. A lot of times I was like, oh, if you're compliant, you've met certain criteria, like you've done awareness training,
Mm-hmm.
you have this in place, you can say you've done this, check, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore compliant. With him, it really opened my eyes to the fact that like compliance is, the output of all these things that came before it. So having different processes in place or certain compliant audits done or compliance audits done. And when you pass it, it kind of puts in the perspective of like knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pass a test without the information for the test.
Right.
So like you could cheat off of your neighbor
Of course.
and make it look like and still have a passing grade. But you don't actually pass a test without having the knowledge to get the answers. Like a math test, for example, if you don't know how to do simple algebra, you're probably not going to pass an algebra test, right? Or you're probably going to fail your SAT or ACT, if they even do those anymore. I don't know. But you have to have that knowledge to correctly solve the problem. And then the output of that is a grade. So compliance kind of falls in that category where it's like, if you don't have everything done before, you can't expect to have a good grade or a good compliance, like level of compliance. So that's something that I kind of picked up from Rich, but it kind of stuck with me. And the first thing I thought about was, if you're going through doing all these audits and checking people off or saying no, they're missing this, the first thing I thought of was like, I wonder what are some of the craziest stories of things that, so far in your past that, not that you would name names,
Sure.
but you might talk about a situation and maybe, people will look at that and say, wow. Or like, I've never thought of that, or I've never heard of a story like that. Do you have any like little gems like that?
It was really there have been some interesting moments, yes. I mean, literal closets that, of stuff that, you weren't supposed to see but you saw, and that was
Like paperwork?
oh yeah.
Okay.
Paperwork. There was always a lack thereof, of paperwork that then needed to be there. But yeah, there were cabinets and there were things that people tried to keep in the down low. There were things that would come up where someone would unknowingly, wanting to be helpful, they would expose something else, that maybe didn't relate to the audit, but all of a sudden, like, you make this discovery of something and then ethics starts to take control. You're thinking like, oh crap, okay, now this is outside of the scope. Like I would see that like this is outside of the scope of my audit. This is not part of the controls that I'm here to assess. However, this is a thing. this is a thing, and like in my case, I kept working on these engagements, and you had multiple bosses. You had the client boss, you had your boss, you probably had another boss somewhere like that. You had all these people kind of like trying to, manage you, or they had some sort of control or governance over you, over the engagement. And then a discovery happens and you're seeing these things, and maybe they don't even realize what it is, but you do because of whatever, some past experience or something you've learned or everything like that. And then you're like, do I tell? Who do I tell? How do I tell them? And you figure out who you're going to trust, pretty quickly. Because if you tell, in my case, if I told my boss from my company, but I didn't tell the client boss would be pissed off because they weren't told first. If I told the client boss of the engagement, but I didn't tell my boss at my company first, they would be pissed because you can't release information to the client, without, filtering it through or anything like that. And so I found myself in a couple of those situations where, it was mostly just, I mean, not just, I don't want to minimize it, but there were elements there of they're trying to be helpful and they're trying to, we want to get that check mark. We want to get that check mark. Here, let me show you this. I'm like, oh shit. That's not and then you're stuck, and then you have to say something, but then you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? And my answer was probably going to be wrong. Every choose your own adventure, I was probably there's going to be some damage inflicted somehow, and you just tried to minimize that. But yeah, especially in those days, you could tell the people that they were going through the audit, but they were very unfamiliar with the process, so it was very new to them, and they would make mistakes, or whatever. They weren't very seasoned when it came to going through a controls review and having to produce evidence and all of that stuff. Then there were people who absolutely hated it and would do anything in their power to avoid, to deceive, to all of that stuff. And you figured out pretty fast, how do I deal with this? And again, I was very young and not, well seasoned myself. And so I had to lean on our engagement managers a lot for guidance in the field and dealing with these people and these personalities and everything like that. But it was wicked. Yeah.
Like something that comes to mind is like if you ask for like some sort of information and I'm just going to throw a name out there like Susie, right? Susie walks up and she's like, hey, here, I have the password to get into that system. And it's like, wait, is that on a Post-it note, Susie? And she's like, I got it off of our manager's desk. He told us whenever we need to get access to it, just to use this piece of paper and log in real quick. And then you're just like, is that like fairly, I guess, aligned to like the situation?
Yeah, it's literally and figuratively. Like it's something as simple as that, would happen. And literally you would find the whole, oh, let me flip over my keyboard. Here it is. Here, this is what you want. And it's like, controls over views of what a person can see. And somebody had deity rights, and they shouldn't have, or everyone did. It's like, oh, everyone who works on this, we only have one role. It's administrator, or and they could do and see everything in a certain system.
Yeah.
Because there was no role-based access. There were no tiers at that time. For the concept of minimum necessary was not even a thing at that point. There were so many people that just cared about getting the work done, and they were so conditioned to being able to do that when these frameworks would come into play and all of a sudden companies would be required to follow them and to prove compliance with them to some degree, depending on who they were. Yeah, it was really, really interesting and very painful for a lot of them to have to start to deal with that. And when you went in to go audit them, you were persona non grata, walking in that door, because all of a sudden now all these things that they never wanted to do, now they've got to play nice and show that they're doing them, quote unquote,
Yeah, you're basically walking into a cave with a flashlight.
Absolutely.
And they're just like, why? Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever find that like certain types of business owners had certain types of compliance results? Or like, we'll say maybe a better way to phrase that is like culturally. Was there a certain type of culture where you kind of walk in the door and you say, you know what, based on what I've seen, right? An assumption I can make is that the results of this will be at a certain like tier of success. And then you walk into another place and you might talk to either an owner or an operator or an executive, and you kind of get the feel that like culturally you don't expect, based on the cultural experience, that you don't necessarily expect to have a certain like positive outcome from a compliance perspective.
Right.
Like, am I wrong in assuming that that's fairly consistent, or like in the time that you spent doing these audits early on in your career, is, I guess what I'm getting at is, do you find that culture tends to define security within an organization, or is it a subset of people that kind of tilt it one way or the other?
Culture is huge, and I think that remains to be, in my opinion, that remains to be a big deal to this day. One of the things that I think about when it comes to the discipline after all these years that I've been doing this is we all know you can have the best technical products in the world. Like you could have all the big hitters, everything in the magic quadrant, like and implemented and doing all these things, and you could really be like, locked down to the hill,
Mm-hmm.
but somebody's going to screw it up. A human is going to screw it up. And so you talk about like culture, it's about the humans. It's about personalities. It's about willingness to comply, willingness to want to do the right thing, willingness to understand and comprehend the why behind all these controls and things like that we want to do and that we need to do in order to, achieve the goals that we have. And you're working with human behavior, and human behavior fascinates me. It has always fascinated me. The human aspect of life, much less business, much less, how that relates to how we security practitioners, do our thing. And so like you talk about culture, it's like that was so vital. You could tell pretty quickly based on the toxicity of the environment, is the leader of the organization acting like a monarch, or is this a more collaborative type of gig with these types of people? Like I have always found healthcare, and I've spent a lot of time, working in healthcare adjacent, types of companies. It's a different type of person, that does that sort of thing, to do, primary care about people, to, whatever arm of, the healthcare industry that somebody might be in. I have found that it's a different type of person than people in the financial markets, or retail or construction or,
for sure, construction.
Yeah. Any of these other industries, it's like they're very, very different. And you look at, healthcare, and I have found if I walk into a healthcare company, I feel like usually I'm going to come away with a pretty decent audit. They'll have done this before. They'll want to help. They'll feel more often than not that they're doing the right thing, and they'll be behind that because that's how they roll. That's how they're wired. As people in general. I think you go into financial institutions, and I'd worked for some and audited some, and it's a different look because it's like they're used to the regulatory aspect. They're used to the rules that they have to follow. They're used to doing it. Doesn't mean they like it all that much, and everything, but they'll knock it out. It's like, I feel like they'll knock it out, but it's going to be pretty, bare bones, nuts and bolts type of thing. There's not a lot of passion behind it. It's going to be like, this is a necessary thing that we have to do, and we're just going to do it. And then they do. So probably be successful, but it's going to be a no frills type of, success. And you're probably going to have to pull teeth a little bit here and there in order to get the answers that you need, but they're in there somewhere.
It's like minimum effort because on their side.
Yeah. No, it's minimum necessary effort, not so much minimum necessary access, but they're going to do what it takes, but that's not their primary goal for the industry. So they want to focus their efforts in a different area. Yeah. And then you get into some of these other places. It's like the less regulated that they are, the less attention I saw being put into their program, into their control sets, into compliance, into their technical protections and everything like that. And so you could just kind of like slide down the hill, with that in subsequent industries. But the culture from the top down, the recognition of how important it was for them, as a company to do these things, to have a good program, to lay out the controls, to document the processes and actually execute them, all of that stuff. I mean, you knew right away by executive management level, just meeting with them, talking with them, and you knew you had a good idea of what that result was going to be and how difficult it was going to be to actually get to that result, how much work it was going to be.
So like before you even started, you kind of knew what the journey was going to look like.
Pretty much, yeah. You had a good idea. You could be wrong, but more often than not, you were right.
So I caught something that you said I thought was a little bit interesting, where you had said like healthcare, financial services, and then from there they kind of just like fell into place. This is purely an opinion, right? If as an outsider looking in,
Sure.
I wouldn't consider myself a security practitioner or even an audit, an auditor, an expert, or of an expert knowledge of auditing, right? So think of it more so like layman's terms. What I picked up there was this idea that certain verticals or areas or we'll call it verticals, like healthcare, financial, have very set in stone, rigid like structures in place around security because of SOX compliance, HIPAA compliance, and things like that. And there is a less of a not burden, but less of a motivation, perhaps might be the word, incentive maybe, for organizations that fall within the corporate space to abide by those same compliance guidelines, right? And what, again, this is kind of like layman's terms, like what I find interesting is you'll always hear about healthcare breaches and financial service breaches, but you hear a lot more about breaches that happen outside of those sectors. And am I right in attributing the fact that because of all the compliance necessary in the healthcare and financial services kind of being status quo, if you will, versus the corporate space, the public space, or not public, private space, like private entities and businesses, they're not held to the same standards as these other ones, that you tend to find that the results of a compliance audit tend to be at a lower level, see, I guess I don't know how to describe it, like like a lower grade. Like, I guess I don't know the right terminology, but is that a fairly consistent thing where it's like, because healthcare and financial services have very rigid structures in place to ensure, compliance, and other people may not have that. Do you tend to see that these other organizations, in your experience, kind of suffered or had a less ideal output from their audits? Like, am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're not wrong. I speaking just in my experiences when I walked in the door and I would perform these audits at that time, yeah, that was generally the outcome. And especially back then, again, the whole security space was not nearly as mature. I mean, like, you're in like the mid
2010,
not even, before that, like the mid 2000s there. It's like 2004 through 6 or something like that,
Okay.
roughly at that space. So things were still, by comparison, pretty immature to begin with. Like, if they had, if a small company with like one office had like, antivirus on their computers, or on a few of their computers, that was like a big win for them, like that was huge, and it was like, all right, cool, you did something, it's great, but that was a novel idea, for them, much less, any level of defense in depth that we now expect for a mature program. They just didn't have it. They would do a little something, or they would find like their mail server and they would throw antivirus on it, but nobody liked that because it made it run slower. And then people would complain because the thing wasn't working like it was, but it was a necessary evil, and that's really what I saw a lot of, of it being looked at as a necessary evil, but the smaller, or the different types of organizations, what they did and how they would have scored on an audit if I had gone in there, like if that was my engagement at the time. Yeah, if you weren't in an industry that had some sort of regulation about it, there was a definite difference in your scores or the amount of findings and the severity of those findings from the audit than I would have found in the more regulated, stuff. That was pretty consistent at that point in time, and that those couple of years when I did that.
So we'll just assume that we hopped in the DeLorean.
Okay.
And we went back to the future, right? So you were in 2004. We'll say 2005.
Sure.
Which is a good year. That's when I graduated high school.
Okay.
Just to give you some context. Yes, it was high school, 2005. I had to think about that. So almost 20 years ago, right? So that means my 20-year reunion is coming up. And
Crazy.
I guess I got to go to that, maybe.
Maybe?
I actually skipped my 10-year one because I was like, what for? So the 20-year one, I might go to it just to kind of see who shows up.
Sure.
But, most of the time you don't really recognize these people or what they're, they don't even know who you are. Like I was a nobody. I had like 4 or 5 friends, maybe. I had a few more, but I hung out with all the smart kids because I was in like honors and AP classes.
Sure.
2 of my buddies got 1600s on their SAT.
Dang.
For context, right? Actually, and then the other one got a 1560. So of 3, the first 3 people I could think of, yeah, and then another one got a perfect score on the ACT.
Wow.
So Harvard, U of M, Stanford which is kind of why when I'm applying, I'm like, I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to go to Harvard with Kevin. And we played a funny joke on Kevin, actually. I'll tell you real quick so this is back in the day when emails were, this is a terrible story, but myself and a couple of buddies within this group, not to name names, knew that Kevin was accepted into Harvard. He was early acceptance. And we were all on a music trip because we all played an orchestra together. And we had spoofed an email, sent it to Kevin saying that new information came up about his application.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And that his offer was rescinded. And he wasn't with us because he wasn't in an orchestra.
Sure.
And that went over pretty well.
I can imagine.
But it was at a time where, Harvard.edu something could have been like Harvard. I don't remember how we did it. I think we did it with like a Yahoo email, but it was just a joke, right? It didn't really turn out that well, but he had a good laugh after it, from what I remember. But a funny little story there. So anyway, so we're going to hop into the future, right?
Yes.
So from 2005 to 2025, in the future technically because we're still in December, but I'm curious because I haven't been, part of security for 20 years, like you have. When it started in this compliance part, right? Where you're out there doing the compliance while kind of building your family till now. If you were to take, and this is more so for optics or perspective or normalization, if you were to take a look back and say the best results of an audit were like an A.
Okay.
How would those relate to requirements by today's standards? Like an A, almost like the dollar bill, like $5 30 years, or $1 25 years ago could have got you a bag of chips.
Yeah.
$1 now can't even buy you a Coca-Cola at McDonald's.
True.
Right? So there's this difference in how far the dollar goes. So my question is more so relative to the world today. How would the highest performing audit of 20 years ago fare against today's standards?
It's a great question. The thing that comes into my mind when you say that to try to make, to find a parallel in my brain is like, especially at my company, we undergo audits like all the time. We're in healthcare, and so you have a lot of things that you need to comply with, and from a contractual perspective with your customers, as well as, regulatory and, everything in between. So there are certain certifications or programs, your ISO, your, PCI, your, the frameworks that you can assess yourself against. There's one that's healthcare related. It's called High Trust. And we are contractually obligated to be High Trust certified, and we have been for the last 7 years. High Trust has different tiers of certifications. So they've had the bright idea of like, there are small and medium-sized businesses that can't do very much, but they should have these minimum They should
Yeah,
have
yeah.
these minimum controls. And then you have, when you get more mature, then you should have this many. And then when you're at this level, you should have this many, that type of thing. So it's kind of one way I look at it. Like the max audit back in 2005 of everything would have been like the beginner tier of what I'm seeing in some of these, certification programs or whatever, these assessments where they have multiple tiers based on your maturity, your size, your data record count, whatever they determine to be the cutoff for each level. Back then, to do what the more mature organizations do now and what the scrutiny that they're put up against, it's you're in the ballpark, but you're sitting in the 400 level nosebleed seats. You're not in the front row or in the box down next to the field type of thing,
Okay.
But you're there, there are things going on. You're doing things. The companies at that level, things are happening, and that's way better than the ones that completely ignore it or they don't view it as a priority. And unfortunately, there are still a bunch of those that are out there that they can't, they won't, they don't know how, they're just trying to get by, whatever reason that they may have. There's no structure in place. There is no security function present at all. So the ones that are doing something, awesome, good for them. I'm glad that they are. I'd rather have something than nothing. But yeah, at that point, they're doing now at that base 100, 200 level tier that organizations back then, that was their max. Like that was like the crown jewels of an assessment if you could nail, that size thing at that point.
Okay. Yeah. So like 20 years ago, the highest tier performance, if we can even call it that, but I think we can draw the parallels there. Say the highest tier performance 20 years ago is essentially table stakes for today's type of requirements.
I think in the experience that I had, yes.
Okay.
And that was in that market, that was with those companies, there all sorts of, conditions or, parts of context that come with that. However, that is what I saw, and I remember that, and I see what's happening now. And yeah, that's how it equates out. Things have changed so much, and we've seen this, all your guests, have seen it up to this point, all the practitioners that we see around town, and across the country, we all know how far things have come since then. The threats are more, we've discovered more things, we've learned a whole lot more, and we've had, more frameworks come into place with more requirements. We've had better technology to help us, defend things. We've had to keep up with the business of, hey, they want to do more stuff, so now I've got to figure out, how do I protect this? Well, I want this type of data now from over here, and we want to do this with. Okay, how do I protect it? So it's just constant, like, ballooning out and of all these possible outcomes, and that means that things grow on our side. The requirements around them grow, if there are some, based on a framework or an industry or something like that. And back then it was way more simplistic, but the capabilities, the attacks, the things that people knew back then was a lot less than what we do now. And now it's just exploding, and we have to sit there and keep up with it. So yeah, at that point, based on what I saw, it was way simpler. It was a simple time, but it's still relevant today, but it's more of a start rather than it's something to be proud of for the organizations that get that far and can nail that level. They should be very, it's not something that should be devalued. I mean, they should really be proud of that, but everyone needs to know that there's now it's the next step, and then there's another one after that, and there's more of a road to go down. That's not your destination. That's just part of your travels.
Yeah, it's like the evolution, essentially. So you can even think about it, I think, in terms, and I'm not a big sports fan by any means, but I have watched a few games, over the years. Typically, my wife has to have football for Thanksgiving. She doesn't even know who's playing. It's usually the Cowboys losing.
That does happen.
Usually the Cowboys losing or the Lions winning,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, Detroit Lions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was born, right?
Right.
In Dearborn, lived in Detroit. I couldn't tell you what the Lions season score is, but apparently they're doing pretty well. Or not their score, their record right now. I think they're doing pretty well. I know last year when we went over to my uncle's house and watched the game for like a playoff. So I know they were doing well then. So I assume they're doing well now.
Mm-hmm.
Optics are, I don't really watch sports very often.
Sure.
But what I do know is if you were to look at the level of, not thoroughness, but the level of effort that's gone into designing a helmet for a professional football player
Mm-hmm.
when they first started, 60 years ago, whenever it was, and you compare that to what it is now and the science behind that, or even the science behind sports in general, there's a clear evolution. We just have people on a field with like something over their head with like a bar across their face.
Yep.
And that was good enough.
Yep.
Right? We got the gameplay, we got it going. That's how football started. Now there's like measuring, or there's monitoring devices.
Exactly.
There's audio devices to where signals, wireless signals can go in to send messages. I'm sure there's something that measures shock, and there's things that measure any sort of trauma to the head. So that way, if someone were to, get hurt, they have these tools to look back and say, well, what happened?
Right.
But that's kind of like table stakes now. But you look back 50 years ago, that would have been like the Jetsons,
Emerging technology. Yeah.
right?
Totally.
So I kind of like liken it to that, where it's, by today's standards, it's very, very strong, very, we'll say, information heavy on what it provides the people that need that information to make decisions, because that's what they're doing. They're making decisions for the game based on what they know about the players and getting them messages in and out, or how they're doing health-wise. But, 50, 60 years ago, it was just take this ball and get it over there.
Right.
Right? There wasn't necessarily a science behind what it is today. And I kind of think of security as the same thing, where it's like in 2005, I mean, you had McAfee, right? You had whatever Norton antivirus on your computer for, $49.99 from whatever store you could buy it from.
That's right.
And you were good because it was there. Now you might have 5 or 6 different agents on your device monitoring for different things.
Easily.
Right? Like maybe one's for email security.
That's right.
One's for DLP, right? One is for something else. One is for like VPN, if you still use that, right? Like you have all these agents now, and they're still there, just like they were before. But now there's a lot more, and there's more of a science behind it. So I always find it interesting to think about like how things evolve and compare them relative to the gold standard 20 years ago. And what's interesting with you is you were there 20 years ago and you're there today. And it kind of got me thinking, like, I wonder how these two worlds would interact if we pull them out of a time machine and put them next to each other, how they would look for maybe the people that are new in security, that all they know is, Splunk and the Sims
Right.
and the SOARs of the world and all these other things that you could buy and spend millions of dollars on versus just the antivirus,
Yeah.
right? The Norton antivirus.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I was thinking about. I just got back from reInvent, and it was my first one ever.
Okay.
It was pretty good. Won't lie. I took all this with me, or at least that box on wheels, and then I, took out the cameras and everything else stayed. But we did a few recordings in a studio, or not a studio, in a room.
Okay.
So we had a suite, and we brought in a few people. That one of them was the chief customer officer.
Okay.
Over at Netscope, Ben. So his interview will probably go on a little bit. And we had a couple more. One of them is a guy in Vegas that runs a vendor, like a VAR, or what he called a partner, value-added partner. So he was in. And then we had another gentleman that built the cloud practice at another vendor out of California and ended up starting his own company. And we ended up going to lunch. It was myself and two others, well, him and another person that, was a mutual friend. And we were meeting someone else that works in the startup world. And they were working on some stuff. And what I found interesting was I got this idea that there's two types of people in security. There are those that have been through a breach, and then there's those that haven't. And in the conversation, the gentleman that started his own company, like a managed incident response company, he asked that question, not two types of people, but he asked, have you ever been through a breach? And he didn't get a straight answer. And that's what made me think about it, is like the other person that we were having lunch with that was at the startup was kind of like, didn't really answer like yes or no.
Okay.
It was, well, I've been at these places. I was like, okay, but that doesn't answer. Like, have you been through a breach?
Right.
And it kind of led me down this idea that there are, rose-colored glasses, and then there's not. And that hopefully everyone's been through a breach. And I know it sounds terrible. Like, I hope you've been through a breach. It's like wishing someone to be ill in some way. Like,
right.
I hope you almost die.
Right.
And it's less of the, I want bad to happen, but I think it goes with, I want you to be poor. I want you to know what it's like to have $5 in your bank account, because then when you have more, you have appreciation for what you have.
Right.
So I think of a breach in the same way. It's like, not that I want anything bad to happen to anyone, but I think there is a shift in mindset, or a shift in the view of the world, pre and post breach.
Oh yeah.
So you agree with that?
Oh, completely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you go into the cave of a cat, you come out a lion, like post breach. Like, it's the cave that transform you, because it's all theoreticals. It's all based on what you've read.
Yeah.
It's all what you've heard. But until you're actually on the battlefield or in the trenches, you don't really have that experience to rely on. So my next question is more so geared towards the change, because I assume, based on nodding your head, that you've been through at least one, right? And I'm curious to hear, because there's a lot of newer people getting into security that don't have that experience. So a lot of maybe things that they might say would be theoretical or based on what they've heard, but they haven't actually been there. So I'm curious, kind of like the shift in mindset that happens in your case, or maybe in another person's case, where pre-breach, maybe you had these optics of this of the world, as it were. Post-breach, you now have a new perspective. What was that like? If you could talk about it, that'd be great. But I think I'm also interested in like pre and post, kind of.
Sure.
There's two types of people, and what that, maybe we'll say transcending to the next level of understanding the severity of a breach compared to what you thought of it before.
Yeah, it's this again really fascinating. It goes back to the whole human behavior thing, and now we're talking about the humans in the practice, and where they are in their career and what they've experienced, and there's no substitute for that. It's like that moment when you have all these great playbooks for every single foreseeable type of incident that could happen, and then it happens, and you're just like, screw that, let's go, and you hunker down and you do it, and it's like there's value to things like that in a framework. I do maintain, though, that the critical decision-making skills in that moment with the context, it's not something that you can ever 100% prepare for, and so to experience something like that and dealing with the context of the situation, and do you have the right people around you available that day, to help you with it, with what needs to be done? Are they able to act and react in a manner that matches up with the severity of the situation? All of these like variables, it's like, and sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And then you have to figure out, okay, how do I deal with that, and you're doing so on the fly because, the time sensitivity of certain aspects of, an incident, that happens, and the breach may be declared later, maybe it won't be, but there's something going on, and I have to deal with this now, and I have to deal with this quickly, and I have to get to a level of contain, and then I can start doing more stuff with it. And do I have to engage somebody else at this point? And when do I have to tell my boss? When do I have to tell legal? When do I have to all of these things? And it's like there's no playbook for all of that, But I think pre-breach, you do prep yourself as best as you possibly can. You try to say, I need to look here at these logs in the case of something happening over here. I need to check out these alerts to see if something might be getting through over here. What are the firewalls showing? What is my anti-malware stuff showing? What is DLP? You brought that up. Another thing that probably wasn't thought about very much 20 years ago, but now is, and how well is that doing, and how's that working, and how do I get all of this together? And do I have to look at it, or can I trust somebody that I'm working with to be able to interpret these things quickly enough and well enough to take action on an incident, in the time frame when it needs to be done? It's like that's like one of the most, I always look at that as like one of the most important parts of my job. It's like, I can do all of these other things with a program and lead a team and everything like that, but I do really feel that I'm hired, and one of my main roles is I'm there because an incident is going to happen and it's going to need to be dealt with, and I need to be there to do that. They need somebody there to do that. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm there. Why somebody is in that position and everything, because it's going to happen. Something is going to happen. Will you know quickly enough? Can you react to it quickly enough? And can you minimize the damage quickly enough? And that is all something that it's like, I think about firefighters too. It's like you can go through the school and you can do the trainings and everything like that. But I have to think, I've not done the profession myself, but I have to think that there is no substitute than your first fire and actually getting in there and working with the team, that varying levels of experience to try to deal with this in a building you've never been in before. And how are you going to know how it's going to act or react, when a fire gets to here or something gets weakened over here? And I mean, you do have to go through it, I think, to really be able to appreciate that. I mean, there's value to preparation.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but there is, I don't know of anything that truly would compare to going through it, and dealing with it. So yeah, there is a definite difference between pre-incident or pre-breach and what you're like on the other side. You
come on like a
having dealt with it,
like a changed person.
Yeah.
It kind of, and I think I've said this before, but it reminds me of the Tyson quote, where everyone's got a plan till you get punched in the face.
That's right. Yeah. Basically.
So you've been punched in the face a few times.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like.
Yeah.
And you said like your main goal or your main reason that you're there is to kind of navigate these waters.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because of the years of experience where it's kind of like, so there's a lot of people that want to move up in their professional development, right? And I think a big part of it is you get a raise. I think a lot of times people will associate a higher, we'll call it a higher tier or higher label with more money, right? You go network engineer to senior network engineer to architect, maybe senior architect, maybe staff engineer. With each one of these jumps, generally includes some sort of pay jump. So I think in a lot of cases, when people associate a progression in their career, they assume that there is a financial incentive, right? And that you obviously get paid more because you carry more skills.
Right.
And I think there's, if someone says, hey, you're starting in security, where would you like to be in the next 10 years? They might say, I'd love to be a CISO, right? Or I'd love to be a VP. I'd love to be in an executive role in the next 15 to 20 years. But I don't think, and I think when they think of that, it's like, because I've done my time. I've spent the time in the trenches. I've done all this stuff. I don't think they necessarily think of it as like, I am in this role because I have the experience to get the organization out of this experience. So here's something else too. So I went to, at reInvent, we hung out for a little bit with the CEO of Sumo Logic.
Okay.
And he told us, and this was interesting because he said he'd come on at some point, and him and another friend of mine that are kind of doing like something similar but separate, where it's less, it's more balanced, right? Whereas he is an executive security officer, and then I am kind of just like the other half, like the yin and yang, right? And so we're hanging out with Joe, and he at the Sumo Logic event where it's sumo wrestling.
Okay.
So there was two guys. One guy was 540 pounds. One guy was 570. Oof. And they ran into each other and they just collided. There was one, it was like David versus Goliath. So there's one gentleman, they flew, actually 3 or 4 of them flew in from Japan. So legitimate sumo wrestlers. And one of them was wider than he is tall. One is 70 inches around circumference, whereas he was 60 tall.
Oh, wow.
So he was like 5'2" or 5'3", so, not 60, of course, but close enough. Yeah. But he was wider than he is tall. And so we're at this event, and David versus Goliath, the small guy ends up beating the Emperor's Cup champion, I believe is what it's called, which is essentially the sumo wrestling Super Bowl.
Wow. So
one of the title holders was there. He ended up winning the whole thing, but he was defeated by a guy that was 340 pounds, right? And so before all this happened, we're talking, and, I asked a question because, Joe's been through a lot of different roles. And he talked about, he said, there's only 2 people in business you'll ever find. There's always 2. In my experience, there's always been 2. I'm like, well, okay, well, like, what kind are they? And he said, there's ones that have an idea of where they want to be, like a CEO, and that's all they do. And they go for that. They shoot for it. And there's one that finds himself in a CEO role as a result of jumping around. And he kind of jumped into it further when he explained that when people have a role that they're trying to go towards, it's kind of like blinders on. And they kind of pick up skills as they go, but they go like this track, but they don't, their goal in mind is to get to the finish line and get to that role.
Right.
And he said a lot of times they miss or they lack the skills of certain areas, right? And as a result, they end up becoming a weaker version of what they could have been because they focus on the not the journey, but they focus on the outcome.
Sure.
And then he said, well, and then the other situation is there are people that have been through this, and he was a CFO through a merger, through an acquisition, and a few other different things. And he's like, I was technically CEO and CFO at one point. I had this role, I had that role. I was doing all these different things, and I picked up skills along the way. And what I found was that in my journey that I hadn't thought, would go to where I'm at today, I've picked up all these valuable skills along the way. And I found that I was a better leader or a better version of what I could have been simply by way of kind of jumping from place to place and picking up these different skills. And so it kind of, I was like, man, that's actually really, really like, I actually really like that because I think a lot of people see that where there's blinders on, I'm going to get to this point at any cost. And then there's others that kind of, leapfrog from place to place or from role to role, and they pick up skills along the way. And then eventually when they get to where they want to be, which is, somewhere towards the top, they've kind of accumulated this bat belt of skills. And what it makes me think of, like in this case specifically, is when someone wants to get into security or they're in security, they think of where's my road leading to, right? It's leading to that executive role. And I know as a senior engineer, I need to move up, become manager, director, VP. But I'm not necessarily focused on the journey and the skills I can get along the way, right? So it kind of leads me into the question of like, where along the path you kind of found yourself where, did you from the auditing, right? You have those skills, right? So based on what we've talked about, I have a feeling you fall in category number 2, where you've kind of picked up these different things along the way. And like you said in the very beginning, you didn't necessarily grow up thinking I want to be a security professional, right? You started out in the radio.
Right.
So it's kind of like some people say, I want to be a CISO. I want to be executive leader in security of any kind. And it's at all cost. And I think they kind of miss out on a lot of the journey because they're just going for the position and the money. Whereas like in your role, or from what I gathered, it's kind of, you've been able to kind of get around and get these different exposure to different things. And then now that you've gotten to where you are, your thought is, I am here, right, to ensure that the plan goes according to plan, but also that we get through this. And the only way you get through that is through the experience from all the years before. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I think you technically fall in Joe's description category 2, because you kind of meet a bunch of the criteria that he had given.
Yeah.
But you're also there because of all of these experiences and the nuance that can provide when you get punched in the face. And that, I think, is more valuable than someone that, goes through and does certification after certification after certification, and maybe jump from role to role to role.
Yeah.
And it's almost like leaders aren't necessarily created on their own, right? They're almost born through evolution. So much like how security has changed in the last 20 years, I think the people within security that you find towards the top are there as a result of kind of picking up the breadcrumbs along the way. So that leads me to my next question is, if you were to look back and think that your journey would have brought you to where you're at today, right? Whereas if you had the alternate perspective of, I want to become or head towards leadership in this space, do you think you picked the right path? And I mean that in a way of like, do you think you picked the right path because of not because of the situation now, but more so because of the journey, like with the financial part, going, essentially going broke, that was a part of it.
Yeah.
With the family life, the struggling between, managing the personal life and professional life, right? And then moving on, I'm sure there were other things that we haven't talked about, but like, do you feel like, most people say no, and I've never really asked this question, but most people I assume would say, I love the journey, but like, if you think of it from the lens of there are 2 options for you, get to where you're at today, or at any cost and getting there as fast as possible, or kind of taking the time to appreciate the journey, which one do you think you would have preferred?
For me, the journey is everything. And I don't want to say it. When I was bobbing and weaving through my pre-Arizona professional part of my career, so I'm in the Milwaukee market at this point. Not a lot of huge employers there, so you had limited like shops you could go if you wanted to advance your career. There just at that point in time, there weren't a lot of like big companies that could sustain, large security teams and have, good technology and it's not a one man, mom and pop shop type of security function. There just weren't that many there. People also tended to stay in their positions until they retired or died or something like long term. So it was difficult to find things that opened up. And so I wish I would have had at that time more opportunities to choose my own adventure. The opportunities were somewhat limited. However, like I went from the auditing and that thing for a couple of years and that gig, And I said, you know what, I got to settle down a little bit. I want to be at one company. I don't want to jump around and travel. That just didn't work for my home life at that time. And so I did, and it was risk assessments. It was like internal, like auditing type of thing, but it was very security risk assessments on ourselves, on the different arms of the business that we had, of the different locations. It was in financial services, so they bought up like a lot of little, processors, across the country, and so we would have to go out and assess them. So it was, I still learned a lot, and it was very stable, and again, some great people there taught me some really, really good things. But there was a point, even though I enjoyed it, I stayed there for like 4 years, and I learned a lot. There was a point where I made a decision of like, I need to get technical. I feel like I'm losing my chops here.
Okay.
And I could have become a risk manager. Like I could have started to shoot up that line and been IT auditor, manager, like get up, like really kind of move down that path. I really felt like something was missing. I needed to get back and be more technical again. It had been a while since I was hands-on keyboard, doing firewall rule changes or monitoring a SIEM solution or, deploying agents out to endpoint computers or something like that. And it's like, I hadn't done that in a while. And so I made a conscious change to go to leave that role as an assessor and go into, again, back into the healthcare space and be part of a team and go into the engineering role again, and I was still doing compliance stuff, security compliance, but I was more of a hands-on engineer than I had been in many years. And I felt like that was necessary for me in my personal evolution. And then within 6 months to a year after I joined, the other two members of the team left, and it became a one-man shop.
For you?
For me.
Okay.
And so you have that experience, which was rough because that was 24/7, because it was
Let's do 3 jobs into one.
Yeah,
essentially.
it was, but without the pay, without the power, without any of the perks or anything like that. You just did the job, and there were many points in time during that one, because going back to the attitudes that companies had about security, it was still a necessary evil. It was a cost suck. It was a dollar suck. It was I was concerned about losing my job throughout that time that I was, doing the one-man show. You talk about the people who go and get cert after cert after cert. We brought in a person like that at one point, had a bunch of letters after their name, sat them down on a computer, and couldn't do anything. There was no use for that. So then I had no help there either. And so beyond, even though we had best efforts to do that. And so I had made that decision to go that route, and I could feel the weight getting bigger and bigger on my shoulders, and that wasn't the intent. When I walked in the door, there was a team. When I walked in the door, they had people who knew, a lot about what was going on, and they just, and then within a year, they had all gone on to bigger and better things, and I was still there, and I was running it myself. And so there was a part of me that wanted to take on the challenge to say, this is the first program I get to run, here. Let's see what I can do. The bad part was it was an undue burden on a human being, with all the responsibilities, the time, the constant on-call and everything like that, whether it was warranted or not. And it really took its toll on me.
Was it just you, though, or did it take a toll on everyone else?
It took a toll. I think it was just me, because I was really on an island there. There were a lot of people that didn't know. There was a lot of people, they didn't know what I did. They didn't know how I did what I did. There were some people, maybe some managers in the technology space that got it, but they hadn't lived it. So they kind of understood in concept, but they didn't know what I was doing and the things I had to comply with and make sure that were in place, not only for us, but our clients as well. And so that became too much. My physical health suffered, my mental health suffered. I ended up going to the emergency room one day with chest pains, out of that job. It was a lot. But I was supposed to go through that, apparently. Not the bad stuff. That nobody should have to go through that. But I was supposed to make that change in my career. I was supposed to determine that the route I was going was leaving me with a gap.
Yeah.
And I needed to do something about that. And so I went back technical for a while, to get some chops back into that. And yeah, I paid a price for that, but it was what it was. And I wouldn't be here today without having gone through that, unfortunately, and for various aspects of it. But it is a part of my history now. And I lean back on it, to this day, those experiences. What did I do? How did I deal with this? Mm-hmm. What did I use for that when there was no one to depend on but myself, at that point? And that became extremely valuable later after I took the job that moved me down here. And then I watched that evolution of the company that I've been with now for 11 years. And that my role and the company itself has changed many times over that time. But it's those risk assessment days, it's the audit days, it's the going back and being technical for a while days, and being a one-man shop and completely overloading yourself. All of those things I have leveraged in my evolution at this current company to get to where I am today. And, I wouldn't be here doing this had I not gone through all of that. But there were conscious choices along the way to say, I have a gap, I need to fill this. And that journey, had to happen.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, it kind of leans into the way that you interact with others, right? Because perfect example, someone that has been homeless understands what it's like to be homeless, right? And interestingly enough, like there's a lot of videos you can find on YouTube where they're almost like, not like experiments, because it sounds like, people are part of an experiment, but they'll do certain things where they'll walk up to a homeless person and offer them something. Mm-hmm. And the one that comes to mind is, I can't think of the person's name that does it, but he generally goes around and like offers to help people and then sees what they do in other interactions. And then based on that, he'll like say the one I'm thinking of is he gave someone a homeless person a pizza and said, hey, here you go. And then they sent it to another person and said, hey, can I have a slice? Mm-hmm. And the homeless person was like, yeah, like opens the box. Mm-hmm. It was a huge pizza. There was way more than one person could ever eat. Mm-hmm. But you'll find that the people that share the most are the ones with the least amount to share, right? And it's because they know what it's like to be on that side of asking.
Right.
So I think a lot of these experiences, growing up where my parents wouldn't buy bleach, now I look back and think like, man, like, let's make sure, that doesn't happen, or, we do certain things or act a certain way. And very similar for you, it's like, I am going to just guess, but I would imagine that if something were to happen to people on your team, I don't know how many people fall within, within like a, not direct report, but within like your purview, right, of people that you work with in the security space. But I would imagine that if there were 3 people on a team within that larger team and 2 people left, you would empathize with that person because you understand what it's like to be the only engineer in that role after, say 2 people left.
Completely.
So it's almost like these experiences shape your optics, but more so the way that you proceed with others in the same situation. So much like a homeless person that was gifted something, more willing to share because they understand what it's like. It's like the security professional that's been through a situation where maybe there's been a breach or there's been a layoff or people have quit, right? You have, audits, right? Dealing with the customer side versus internal side for audits, right? You know what it's like to be the auditor that I'm sure you guys hire for the high trust stuff, right? So it's like there's a certain level of empathy that comes as a result of your experiences. And I think that's important because what it allows is for people to take from a shared experience and then create something for other people that haven't had that experience to be better, right? And much like the evolution of security, where 20 years ago it was antivirus, and now it's something way different. It's like these experiences kind of culminate, or not culminate, but it reminds me of like differential equations. When you're taking like a slice of something and you keep adding it and adding it and adding it. So I'll give you a really good example. Have you ever gone through the proof of why the equation for a sphere is what it is?
I have not.
Okay. So this was an aha moment for me in high school. I think I was in 11th grade, and I was in Calculus 1. Yeah, because I took Calculus 3 and 4 in my senior year, which was ridiculous. There was only 6 kids in the entire district of Gilbert, right? So a little bit of a math nerd sitting across from you. And so I'm a junior in high school. I'm in Mr. Stone's class, Mesquite High. And we're just learning at the very beginning of differential equations. And, differential equation has it where you do the limit of the infinite parts from boundary A to boundary B. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, makes sense. I can get that. And what's interesting is if you take a sphere and you were to apply a cross-sectional cut, right? The area of that cross-section is pi r squared, right? Now, if you go from boundary point A to B, that r changes along the way. And if you sum them all together, right? So you kind of take like a little cut and then a bigger cut and a bigger cut, bigger. And then as you get to the center of the sphere, it gets smaller.
Right.
Now, when you sum all those together, you actually get the equation for the volume of a sphere. So the volume of a sphere is actually from taking infinite cuts along the sphere and adding them together. And that's how you actually get the same thing with a cone. If you look at the equation for calculating the volume of a cone or a sphere or a square, and you were to draw it on a graph and have a 2D where you have the cross-sectional area and then you have the long perpendicular side that you're calculating those areas along, and you were to add them together, the limit from point A to point B would actually be, if you replace A and B with, like, let's say the value of those numbers, you would end up with the final equation. So it's interesting because it's like, that's like the aha moment for me when it's like, oh my gosh, like this is how they calculate the volume of a sphere. And it wasn't just some random person with a random number. There's math behind it. Yeah. And that math is math that, a lot of people don't ever like care to learn. But it's interesting because when you understand the rudimentary skills required for understanding like math and limits and going to infinity and these different things, and then you apply it to a constrained condition with a set parameters, you understand why the output of the volume is what it is. All that just to say, when that in my mind, that's what I correlate to your experiences. You have to, in order to understand what security involves, it requires you from go to point A to point B, right? Or in this case, taking a cross-section of your life and the experiences that you've had, right? And as you go along, they will change, much like the radius changes in a sphere along the axis, right? And as you look at that and you add them all together, eventually you get to the end. And you end up getting the volume of the sphere. But you can't get there without going through each piece. And each piece has its own unique experience, whether it's losing coworkers, right? That was a cut, right? Becoming a leader, hiring your first person, hiring the people that are full of certifications, right? And it's like, without these different pieces, you don't get the full picture. So that's kind of how I, when you're speaking about it, I envision it in my head of how the whole is the sum of the parts, right?
Completely.
The leadership role is the sum of these cross-sectional cuts at a point in time with everything different. They're all very similar things, but one condition always changes. And in your time, in your experience, that's the time, right? The time is always changing. So it's kind of like an abstract way to think about security for me is like to get a full understanding, you have to go from the very beginning to the end, or at least the perceived end. But you have to take these cuts along the way. And each cut provides a lesson.
This is true. And we've all got our own set of cuts, and it's fascinating to me to hear the stories that others have had that get them to that, to that point of the equation, basically, and what has colored and flavored and textured, their experience in the way that they do things, nowadays, and what led up to that. You talked about like, lessons in empathy. You talk about like the experiences and how, how it would feel if there were cuts of labor cuts or, position eliminations and you're going from, 3 to 1 or something like that. And yeah, I would absolutely feel for those people because of what I went through. You see that professionally in the experiences like that one that I've had, over time. I would honestly say that just as important is life experiences and working with people and that sort of empathy and understanding of their personal situations when you're trying to work with someone and you want to get the most out of them and you want to understand who they are and what are they dealing with. The things that I've gone through in my life and how they affected me professionally have been instrumental in my relationships with my coworkers, with my teammates, my management and everything like that. I mean, I have the story of the financial issues that I've had and which culminated in a bankruptcy in the end, having to declare.
Oh, you went BK?
I did.
Okay.
I did at one point. It came later, but yeah, there was no other way to go because of the medical issues that my first wife was facing. It just became too much, and that I had no other route to take in order to protect us, and to keep the house and to be able to have a car to work, and everything like that. So I've been to that level too, to get to there. During that time, unfortunately, my first wife passed away. So I became a widower at the age of 33. And so with a child, with a young 11, 12-year-old
with two, right?
daughter. No, just one. I have one daughter, but with her seeing the unfortunate, downward descent of health in her mother to the point of where she passed away, unfortunately, at that point in time, and she's 11 or 12 at that moment. So dealing with that as a father and as a widower and in bankruptcy and trying to navigate through and to have a professional life at that point and to keep working and to keep, supporting and to go through those sorts of issues and, and then figuring out, okay, what's the next start? And then what is next on the path? And how does that help me relate to people? And when you start, like, I have found that when I start working with people, there's a level that we get to where their stories start to come out. And you realize how their personal stories, flavor, color, texture, how they work. Where do they excel? What's not their gig? What is my role in helping them get to the best place for them? And then they're going to come up with challenges throughout the time that you're working with them. They're going to have spouses or family members that get sick or unfortunately pass away. They're going to have problems with their kids and parenting. Their dog is going to pass away. They're going to have these moments where the world is bigger than the job that they're doing from 8 to 5 or 7 to 4 or something like that. And how do you handle that? As a leader, as a teammate, as somebody like that, those sorts of experiences that I've had growing up, adult life, professionally, personally, have been as valuable as any click of a mouse or tap on a keyboard that I've ever done in my life, because one of my big roles, other than being there, if in case something goes horribly wrong and helping a company get out of that, is I've had so many people help me along the way and teach me things. I am responsible as a teammate, as as a subordinate or whatever, as a workforce member, to give it everything that I have to maximize those around me. It's that whole, chefs eat last or whatever. It's kind of that sort of mentality too, in the way that I need to make sure that they're well fed as best I can. I believe in that. I believe in, nurturing talent. I believe in helping people get through situations that they didn't see coming but are going to affect them, and they're way bigger and more important than anything that they do for me or that would show up on a personnel evaluation or something like that. And so my life has not just been me sharing the professional experiences that I've done and how I got to where I am and how I picked the elements of the security tree and all of its branches to get to where I am. That's something, but the other flavors and colors have been just as important, if not more so, and have helped me get to where I am, as well as helped people, hopefully helped people, along their paths, figure out where they want to go and what they want to do and feel supported to get there and put them in the best spot that they can. There's so much that we bring along consciously or unconsciously from our lives, into this whole thing. And it's never really straightforward, but man, is really, really interesting when you stop and think about it. And again, that sort of stuff fascinates me. And I can, there are so many moments in, between the lines of being in that job, of walking on that field and doing what you need to do, that where that came into play. And that was just as important as any technical change I've ever made or any audit that I've ever performed on, any company.
I think it's because, an experience with another person, it can be replicated, right? I feel like comedians kind of are a really good example of this, where they walk into a room and they tell a joke and everyone laughs. And there's like a certain sense of like accomplishment because you've kind of put a smile on someone's face. And then tell the joke again to the same group, it doesn't go over as well because they know what to expect. Right. But you take that same joke and you go to a completely new group, a new city, and you land it again, and the whole room like erupts in laughter. And it's like, I did it again. But it's like, there was nothing different there was nothing different about the joke.
Right.
What was different was the people that were involved. And it's almost like, one experience of helping, like you said, if someone has a dog that passes and it's like, you've been through that. You have an idea of, what you can offer to help.
Yeah.
But also like what you could do as maybe a coworker or a mentor or just someone involved in the process or involved in that situation rather. And you do that. And then it happens again with someone else. It's completely different. It's like you can recall as another, person, like human, the emotions tied to that experience and what it felt like. And then the result is you act in a similar fashion, if not the same, and you kind of elicit that same sort of response, just like a comedian would as they travel from city to city.
Right.
And what you hope is that as many smiles as you want to put on someone's face or people's face, you just don't get the same person in the same room to hear the same joke, right? Because then that, that experience has already been accounted for almost. So in a lot of ways, what it sounds like to me is you've had, 20 plus years of kind of navigating these different situations, a snapshot of the sphere or the circle in this case, right? Of that experience. And then you just add them up. And then when you get to the end, you have enough to recall, almost like a query, right? If this, what do I do in this case, right? Return whatever results you need. And it's like, how to interact with it. But I think at a more important level, it involves the people.
Oh,
right? And that's something that Richard always said is like security is about people and nothing else. Because without the people, there is no security. And, people are the ones that are going to break in. People are the ones that are going to support it, are going to fight back. People are the ones that are going to create the products. People are the ones that are going to break the products.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, if you don't take a fundamental approach to understanding the people,
Mm-hmm.
then do you really ever understand security?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think it's really interesting when you think of it like that, as like the human nature part of it. Like something else that we've talked about, not here today, but in prior episodes, is like I had brought up how awareness training
Mm-hmm.
might just be a huge waste of time. And in my mind, it's because the element of people, human nature, is to, you know, make their own decisions, but not everyone makes the best decision for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you can anticipate a certain reaction in a certain scenario, but you can't predict it with 100% accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And in that regard, if you think about awareness training, you kind of understand that someone might click a button, even though they know they shouldn't. And it just might be good enough to get them to click.
Mm-hmm.
I've even had situations where I'm like, oh man, I really hope this isn't real, because if it is, I'm going to get like a collection call at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, you have a bill due. I'm like, no, I don't. But if I did, it looked so good that it was fake, but it would look so good that I still didn't do anything with it.
Right.
Like, oh, I hope it wasn't real.
Right.
Like, I'm willing to take the risk of not clicking to find out the bad news
Mm-hmm.
versus just finding out the bad news later.
Mm-hmm.
But not everyone takes that risk. And I kind of feel like security is the same, where you have a baseline level of expectations of people,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what you want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you expect them to do, but you can't account for everyone, right? And it's impossible, which kind of led me down the path of like awareness trainings.
Mm-hmm.
You're just helping people understand like what they should do, like eat healthy is how I compared it last time I spoke about it, but you can't expect that they will, because if everyone knew that eating healthy was the way to live longer, you wouldn't have unhealthy fast food places to eat from.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't be in business because people would choose to eat healthy, right? But yet there's a business that exists on every corner for a Starbucks coffee,
Right.
for 60 grams of sugar in a drink, in In-N-Out, Chick-fil-A, and all these. Those are probably better than other places,
Sure.
but it's like they exist.
Mm-hmm.
But yet people understand when they do the yearly checkup that maybe they shouldn't have that. But here they are at a drive-through at 6:00 on a Friday.
Right. Right.
So to me, the awareness part seems like, yeah. And then we talked about it's more of like a compliance thing. You have to have it there for compliance reasons,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily like move the needle. And maybe it does, but my perspective is like, people will always choose what they want, and what they want may or may not be in the best interest of the people setting the security processes in place,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you get back to people, it's a crap shot. Is that what they call it? Crap shoot.
Crap shoot. Yeah.
Yeah, you just hope you don't land on 7,
Yep.
right? You get all these other numbers. What is it, 2 through 12? But the minute you land on 7, it's bad news.
Mm-hmm.
We were just in Vegas for reInvent, so
Sure.
it's top of mind.
Right. Right.
Actually,
right.
roulette is top of mind, but that's a story for another day.
That's a whole nother game. But yeah, I agree. The common, what keeps you up at night, Paul? And I say, after people, and people, then I go to something else. But it's like, what's your top risk? And it's always going to be humans. In my mind, it has been, and it goes back to my earlier comment. You can have the best of the best from a technology perspective to really lock things down, and all it takes is one person clicking on on the wrong thing and making that choice, which you have no direct control over, unless you want to go back to the days of the mainframe, where everybody has one screen and they look at one thing, and that's what they get, and it's all centrally controlled, and personalization and all that stuff, it's taken off the table. Unless you want to go back to that, you might have a better chance with your tech stuff to prevent things like that if you remove things from everybody else's hands, that could lead to them making independent choice on something. But yeah, my favorite meme, or one of my favorite memes now that I saw, it probably has been out for a while, but it's one about security awareness training, and it's the the meme from, or I think it's a GIF from Toy Story where the pig is hitting the remote control rapid fire and the channels are changing like really, really fast. And it's like, this is me clicking through my compliance, my annual compliance training.
Yeah.
And we know that's what happens. You can see it in a lot of like learning management systems. You can see duration of time, that they go through it. And it's like, if you don't put restrictors on each slide or each thing, they're just going to go through it really quick. So in that regard, that does become more of a compliance exercise than it is, an actual learning exercise. And yes, there are people who will come back and they'll comment on the content to me and my privacy officer, and they'll speak about like, oh, what about this? And they'll ask questions like, oh, you're paying attention. That's pretty cool. Most people don't. We get that. So yeah, we are checking the box a little bit, but yes, it is relevant information that these people do need to know, that we do encase in that. We put it in our policies too, that we post up on the intranet, that we know damn well very few people actually go and read. Just a few here and there will come back and talk about it, but most of them don't. The things that I have seen lately really get some level of traction are the phishing exercises, the real world ones that we do against the workforce.
Like you own the product or whatever it is.
We go after them. Yeah, we go after the workforce and we pick one and we go out and we do it. And it can have various looks. It can have various actions and reactions. But then at the end, if they enter the data or they do the thing that we don't want them to do, we throw the skull and crossbones up in front of them. They don't like that very much. But that is one of the things that they will comment on the most, is when they get it. And then you start adding an element of competition to it, where you can figure out, okay, we have all of these towers in our organization led by executive leaders. Well, executive leader 1, your team had 33% failures. Executive leader 2, you had 15% fail. And it becomes a competition then, and you can start to, leverage persons like pride, or like gamesmanship or something like that to actually, I want to score better. Oh, I'm going to tell my people, stop screwing around like that, or whatever will get them to a much better level there. You're never going to get to zero. They're humans. Somebody's going to screw it up. And now in the advent of things like AI and other techniques that the bad guys are using to make the messages look better, read better, more effective, more deceptive, it's inevitable that, you're still going to have that problem. But there are ways and things that we can do as practitioners to get the word out and do our best to try to change human behavior, as insurmountable as that may seem at any given day. If we don't at least try, the amount of traction and ground that we gain is going to be minimal.
Yeah. I could see that. I think, making the effort is probably always going to be good and required, right?
Yeah.
But as you're describing that, the first thing I thought of is like, if you want to get the sales teams, you find out who they're working with. Mm-hmm. And this happened, in a previous role where I got an email from someone that I was working with, but it wasn't actually them. And the email signature had their logo, like the company logo and all this other stuff. I'm like, hey, we need to get these items shipped out overnight. I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. Since when, right? Well, I don't know about this. And it was a pretty substantial order, probably like 250,000-ish. So it's one of those things where you're just like, really? Let me take a look at this. And it turns out it was fake, right? But what I think about is like, it got me thinking, like, instead of just processing the order right away, because it came from the domain was a little bit different than the actual organization's domain. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking like, if you really want to get a salesperson, you say, hey, like the DocuSign's broken, right?
Right.
And it's like, hey, I can't sign this document, or like my work email's down.
Yep.
Work email's down. Can you send me the DocuSign here, and I'll sign it? And then it's like, it would have a link in there or something. It's like, here, click on the link and it'll it'll do what I need you to do for me.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I need to get a PO. Like I need to get a signature. So click. Right.
Exactly.
That's how you get a salesperson. Marketing people, you say, hey, your last marketing event went well. Here, check out the results.
Right. Yeah.
Check out the results from your last booth engagement or whatever.
Here's your click to opens for the last, for the last newsletter.
Here's the click rate or click through for all of your past, like Spotify.
Right.
This is a good time at the end of the year if there's a way to like, summarize people's efforts. Like, hey, check out your year review, right? Like Spotify does with the music. It's like, hey, check this out. Check out how your efforts have, turned into whatever. And it's like, click. Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a necessary evil in a sense, but I think at the end of the day, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where it's like the people are, like, or even like what Rich said, is that people are the common denominator, right? And without them, there is, you have to understand people well enough to be successful. What I did find interesting though is that I've never asked the question of what keeps you up at night, but I feel like enough people get that question, so I don't ever ask it. I try and think of things that are outside of the box, like how do the worlds compare, or the things I asked about today. But everything that I had in my mind to ask, I've already run through.
Okay.
So we're at the point now where you get to ask me any question, because most of it's been me asking, right? So I can't just have you show up for a couple hours and then leave without at least getting something out of me. So I guess this is it.
So you already answered one question, which was the significance of the cello. So I had to know. So you got me on that one. What is something in the security space that you haven't gotten to yet in this sequence of podcasts and in interpersonal reactions that interactions that you've had that you really want to get to? Like is there something like I want to know more about, or I've heard about this aspect of, and I know you're talking to more than security people, and your range is a lot broader than that. But just kind of speaking from my function, is there something that you've got in your mind that up to this point hasn't shown up in one of your interviews or one of your conversations, but you're like, I really want to talk about this?
So I guess, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but so one of the gentlemen that I've met, through all this, he does a lot of his own stuff, like on YouTube, and it's more so like food related and things like that. He has his own channel. He does, with family and friends. We met up, and it was this idea that, and I didn't know that's why we were meeting, but when we'd met up, I guess I was, cool enough, right? At this lunch by my house, where he said, "Hey, like, I think we should do something together." And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure, I don't care," right? So I think this is more so like personal stories, right? The stories of the people. I don't necessarily like look at a top 10 question list and say, what are the things that everyone's asking? Because I kind of feel like you can get that everywhere else. But what you can't get is necessarily the stories of, having a negative bank account, right? Being out of work for 5 months and kind of, getting gifts or loans from family just to survive, right? And you mentioned the story with your wife, right? And in the hospital and the passing, and like those are all things that no one ever really talks about.
Right.
So I think I like to kind of focus in on that, because you learn a lot about people, much like you said, what makes them tick or what drives them. And to me, that's interesting. But what I don't really talk about here is, so with this other guy talking about, oh, what should we call this? It's like, I want it to be like kind of edgy, kind of like something new, unique. And my job was to come up with a name. And so I sat there for a little bit and I thought, like, what's one thing that no one ever talks about? Gambling addictions, right?
Okay.
And a lot of times, like, when you think of people that gamble, you think of degenerates, right? Like, oh, it's just another degenerate, right? But they're losing their money. So I came up with a bright idea that, as an edgy name, we would call it the tech degenerates, right? But it's spelled instead of how you spell degenerate normally, it ends in IT. So it ties back to IT, like IT tech degenerates.
Yeah.
It's more so he's the CISO for internal applications and infrastructure at a company out of California. And then I'm more so just me.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of yin and yang.
Sure.
And it's less of a like personal stories. It's more so him spot checking people because he has 20 years of experience in the different places that he's worked. And I have more so like my sales background. Right. But one of the things that, you know, so when we were in Vegas, you know, we were walking around and it's like, gotta go to the ATM real quick. Like, yeah. And then we would just walk over to the roulette table and we would walk into the high stakes roulette and play for, you know, 5-10 minutes, make a few $100 and then leave. Right. I have fun doing it. He had fun doing it. We both were winners, but I can't imagine like something that we never talked about with anyone really in this studio are like the things that people do for fun outside that like maybe people would look like, oh, you like to gamble, right? And I think everyone has like something that they like to do that everyone is like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that. So that's kind of more geared towards the other recordings, which is why I had all this stuff. But I think it would be interesting to hear kind of, see, I don't even know how to phrase it, but like things that people are less likely to talk about because of whatever implication it might have. And I don't think I'll ever really see that here, right? Whereas I think here is more so geared towards personal stories and the things that people have been through, you know, not when they go out and bet a bunch of money on the Super Bowl or do things that, you know, I mean, everyone's got crazy stories, but they don't ever talk about it. So that's probably one thing I probably will never have here. So I'm not asking you for a crazy story or anything, but I think with the other one where it's more so, I would say unfiltered, more so just knee-jerk reactions and answers. I might be able to get some good like stories out of people, but then it toes a line of like, can we share this? Right. And I feel like everyone's like, for me, I enjoy playing cards. I enjoy playing poker. And I'll go to the casino more so now than I have before because I just have more fun doing it. Because I don't, it's more like for fun versus for a living. So I just enjoy it. And it's like a mental mind game, right? But no one ever really talks about that. Like, so that's probably like the one area that I think would be interesting to hear about. I just don't expect people to be willing to share those stories. So I guess maybe that's just the answer is like things like stories that people aren't willing to share on camera would be interesting. But then again, my success rate for that is probably pretty low unless it's, you know, related to this, you know, the tech degenerates, which is completely separate, not in the studio at all. It's just more so traveling, meeting people, you know, like the CEO from Sumo Logic said he would go on. We have to message him. So I would say that's probably it. Cause I think with most of the stuff here, I've been lucky enough to not be like invasive. I mean, I'm curious, but I'm not like asking for like specific answers. I think eventually we cover a lot of interesting things, but I just don't really see this going down the route of like degenerate activities. But that would be kind of funny, or at least interesting for me. But so 10-minute answer, but you got the answer.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Makes total sense. You have a white whale at this point for this one?
I don't know what that means, actually.
Is there somebody that you are targeting for this, you know, for this show that maybe you haven't gotten yet, but like that's the one that you're like, at least at this point, like, man, it would be so awesome if we could get so and so on the show and actually be able to interview them. Anybody? I mean, you've had some great guests on so far. I mean, and all the ones that you've posted up to this point that we're recording this, I've had a chance to go through them all, and it's like it just the breadth and the knowledge base of people you've had coming through. This will be your low point, by the way, but you know, I appreciate you having me on anyway.
There's no low points here.
But do you have anybody that in mind right now? You're like, God, at least at this point, man, it'd be really cool if we could get X on the show.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to get like the CEO from NVIDIA on. I mean, that'd probably be a white whale. I think, or like, you know, like a Zuckerberg or someone. That'd be really cool. But I don't really look at it that way. I kind of think of it as I've reached out to a lot of people, A lot of people don't respond. Some people respond and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'll get back to you," and it's like, okay, well, this isn't this isn't free for me.
Right.
So, like, it's not like it's cheap or inexpensive. Like, every episode has a significant amount of time put into it from the recording part, but also from the post-production part. Like, every clip realistically is 8 to 10 hours of work.
Sure.
So for a 1 minute to 2 minute clip, you can expect between 10 hours of work being done on that I'm, paying for someone to do. Same thing with the episode. Like, the full episode took them about 9 hours to finish up with the camera angles and in the lower thirds and all this other stuff.
Right.
So it's like when people say, "Oh yeah, I'll check it out and get back to you," my answer is like, okay, well, you're saving me money, right? Because it's not like it's free.
Right.
So at first I was kind of like hurt, like, oh man, like I put all this time and effort into this and people, it's hard to get them to show up. Now it's like, well, maybe that's better, right? And I don't see people as, well, except for like Jensen, right? Maybe those are the whales, but like as far as like if the local community goes, like I think I'm open to talking to anyone that's willing, right? Because I feel like everyone's got stories to share. I also feel like no one really takes the time to listen. Not necessarily listen, but maybe ask. And I think that's just part of the fun and maybe part of the journey is I've created a space where people can come and sit, hang out, see all the stuff that we have in here, appreciate it, but then also have like a safe space where it's like they can talk about things that it's not motivated by anything else. I'll give you a really good example. There's a text going out this morning to myself and like 4 other people about an event happening on Thursday. And one of the people on the list said, "Oh no, I can't go to that. I went to one of their events and the salespeople are ruthless." So you know how like you go to an event, you kind of give up your work email and the people that sponsor the event get access to that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, well, thanks for meeting us. And it's like, I never met you. You get all that and it just like kind of piles up after every event. So, and one of the things that we had talked about in one of the recordings was these events and how, it's just really hard for salespeople to get through the noise, right?
Yeah.
But they also create so much of their own noise.
Right.
And, this person said, I don't think I'm going to go to their event next year because of how it went. And it's like, that's a terrible thing because now there's someone that could have gone to an event, either contributed in some way or had attended to learn and kind of boost what they know or what they're learning about and kind of, evolve in a sense. And now they have less interest because of the post event, like the post conference.
Right.
And to me, it's like, man, like when people come here, there've been people that have come in here and they've left and I send them the clips and say, "Hey, this is what we got." That's it. Right. There's nothing else afterwards. Right. And if they message me or whatever, they call me, I'll pick up, but it's not like, I think a lot of times podcasts are geared towards either getting some sort of testimonial, which is self-serving for the people, or they're geared towards, I think of it like a webinar is basically just a sales call. Like a lot of times webinars are just sales calls. Sure. And you show up, you might get a free AirPod, but then you also get a bunch of sales calls afterwards. And that's not what I want. I don't want people coming in here thinking, "Oh, I spoke with Fern and all of a sudden, he's knocking on my door every single day." Like you can ask anyone that's been on here. I've never mentioned anything about work to anyone.
Sure.
Right? Because I don't want this to be known for that. I want it to be known for like, I sat with Fern and we talked about stuff that I haven't talked about ever. Or, he actually reminded me of something really cool. Or, I sat with Fern and I thought I got his perspective on something that I'd never thought about. Because I have like the sales perspective. And I've given that to a few people. And like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So it's kind of more so a way for me to meet people that otherwise wouldn't pick up, maybe, would fall into the fray of another salesperson. Sure. Say, hey, I'm trying to do something different and I'm learning along the way and I'm making a bunch of new friends. I'm getting invited to events that I was never on the list and people are saying, "Just say you're with me." And it's like, okay. So I've had more fun doing this than I've had in a long time. And I hope that everyone that comes in has just as much fun. But I also hope that when they leave with a little something, which are those like the clips, and they can look back and say, you know, that was my favorite podcast, or like that was my favorite experience in a studio.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you know, I actually learned something new from that guy. Or just, you know, whatever it is. But I hope that it's always a positive experience. And if I do enough of those, maybe Jensen will show up.
Yeah.
Maybe Mark will show up.
You never know. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, if perfect example, Dina, I never met her, never messaged her. I did a little research and I messaged her one day, and she said, "Yeah, let me look at your other stuff before I commit." So apparently, every day before work, she downloaded an episode, or not every day, but on her way to work, that she'd drive in, she would listen, and then she eventually said yes. And I remember she sent me the first message, and I'm like, oh gosh, okay. now it's time, right? And a couple weeks later, I didn't hear anything. I'm like, all right, well, okay, you know, that one's cooked.
Sure.
It's gone.
Yeah.
And then she wrote me back and said, hey, you know, I'm busy with this or that, but let's do it around this time. And that was probably like the first time I thought to myself, man, I actually, for someone to listen to everything that I've done, up until her episode, which I think at the time was only 5 or 6 released, to listen to all of those and take the time, you know, on a drive, and then agree, help me see that, like, maybe I'm doing something, I'm going down the right path. Because there's really no validation with any of this.
Right.
Like, there's nothing to say, like, good job. Right? There's no one's like, awesome. People will say, love this stuff, but it's like, how do you really know? And I look at that as like, well, she took the time to listen and then agree to show up. And then when she showed up, she even, you know, talked to you about it.
Yep.
She's like, do you know? I'm like, no, but sure. Open up the computer and said, hey, here we are.
Let's do it.
And usually like warm intros are the best, but you'd be surprised. Like you know what it is? I think the secret's not out. I think once people have seen it and they see like, they've either been here or they see the quality of the output, we'll get a lot more people showing up.
Right.
But until then, like one by one, that's what I'm doing. But it's not a low point by any means. Don't say that.
No, it's brilliant. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. One thing I noticed when I wish I would have been more involved in the local community sooner than I ramped up with it. It's only been in the last few years that I've gotten to know your Dinas, your Mikes, these players that are in the market here, and because they're great. They're really great. They're so supportive. It's really a pleasure to see them at all the different events that we have all across town, and to share ideas and stories and everything like that, and for you to come in and highlight these people on this scale in this market. I want other people to know personally, I'm proud of the market. I'm proud of these, the knowledge base that we have here. I think it flies under the radar, much like, maybe your podcast is doing at the moment, but it's going to blossom out because of people like you doing this and getting this more exposure to what we have here, which is really impressive and really valuable to me. So I appreciate you doing it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and just kind of chat it up for a while. And, I look forward to more, and because there's a lot more people out here that, have their stories that can share things, and hopefully they do respond to you because it's really worth the effort. It's worth the exercise. I want to see more of that here. I think I like what we've built here or what we have here in the market. There's so much good, and I want these people, to be recognized. They're recognized around here. I want them to be more recognized as well, and get more exposure here, and have these sorts of conversations that really bring out these highlights and nuances in them as humans, that, to your point, they wouldn't get in other places. But when they're here, it all of a sudden opens up, and people get to see that. And these are stories that are worth telling. So,
Yeah.
I'm glad this is happening.
And you
Yeah.
get to learn about people more so than you would otherwise learn at
Right.
any event. Because when was the last time well, actually, I can ask you, when was the last time you sat with a complete stranger for 3 hours?
Yeah, I can't even tell you, you know.
See, and
If it wasn't court ordered, I really,
Yeah.
I can't, I don't know.
so I'm just above court order.
Just in duration, not,
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
So I guess any more questions for me, or did we cover it for you?
I think we kind of nailed it
Okay.
at this point.
So in order to finish this episode,
Yes.
I have one ask, and it ties back to the very beginning.
All right.
I want you to close us out, but I want you to close us out in your favorite personality from your radio days.
Oof.
So it's either the rock station, I forget the other one that you said.
Oh gosh, yeah, there were so many. There was a lot of formats.
So say something like, we want to thank you for watching In the Thick of It. I am the guest. And then, of course, you would say, with our host, Fern. We appreciate you watching. We'll catch you on the next one. In whatever. So we're drawing back like 20 years.
Yeah, you are.
But I want you to break out your favorite voice, personality from those days. And then we'll end it there.
All right.
Can you do that?
I'm going to give it a shot.
All right, let's go.
I'll stumble over it, but it'll work. So we'll splice it together. It'll be fine. So, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today here on In the Thick of It. I was the guest, and I was very happy to be here. I am Paul. I'm here with Fern. Just an amazing time today. Tune in next time. More great episodes are going to be popping up. Watch for them on the YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you tell everybody to go and subscribe. We need to get the word out on this podcast. So much great content, and there's even more to come next time. Until then, have a good one.